Good evening, everyone. This is Joy Huntington with the A2A Railway here. And thank you for folks that are joining us online. And we do have some people getting together as well over at Fast Eddies. And we're going to continue allowing people to kind of trickle in. But I just wanted to say welcome to the Toke community meeting. We've also invited folks from surrounding communities if they were interested in attending, and appreciate you joining us. We have a good program this evening. We're going to have a few presenters. Mead Treadwell and Don McCammon will be the main presenters, and you'll be introduced to everybody here in a few minutes. And I appreciate your time this evening. And I just wanted to say welcome, and we're gonna go ahead and kind of let more people jump on. I see we have quite a few attending virtually, so thank you for joining us. And we also have about 25 people or so at Fast Eddy, so they're getting settled over there. And so we're gonna just kind of hang tight for a few minutes and let everyone join us. And while we're doing that, I just wanted to give a few housekeeping items. Right now, I don't see anybody on the phone, but what we're trying to do is kind of have like a multi-platform, multimodal community meeting here, being mindful of social distancing and people's comfort levels with getting together in person. We've kind of been waiting to have a community meeting on this project for a while, given kind of what's going on with the pandemic. And so we really appreciate you being available and interested in participating. We're hoping that folks can call if they aren't able to attend over the internet and with their computers. There's also a way to call in with your phone number, and that kind of opens it up for many people to participate, even if they don't have an internet connection or a computer at home. And so I'm going to just do a few really quick housekeeping items. For those of you that are online tonight, we have about 15 people online. And so down at the bottom of your screen, there should be a raise hand button. So if you want to look down at the bottom there, we're going to periodically stop and ask for questions just to make sure that everyone is kind of, doesn't have any major questions on the information that we're presenting. Every few slides, we're going to stop and ask for questions. So if you want to raise your hand, we're going to keep an eye on who has their hand raised, and we'll be able to open your line for a question to be asked. Everyone's lines are muted until you raise your hand and have your microphone open. It just makes it sound quality and everything a lot better if we have it in this webinar version, but we will open your line if you'd like to ask a question. So I wanted to let you know about that. And then another tool that we would love to have people use this evening is the Q&A box. And that is right down, there's a toolbar at the bottom of your screen. And the Q&A box is also a great way to ask a question there. And I'll go and read those. If you, usually the questions that are asked in the Q&A box are kind of pertinent to the whole meeting, and other people might benefit from hearing the answer and hearing the question. And so I'll go to the Q&A box periodically and ask those questions and get an answer for you. So please feel free to use the Q&A box, raise your hand with the raise hand button. We don't have anyone on the phone, but I will describe how they raise their hand so we can see that they have a question as well. And I'll go over the housekeeping items a few more times. Again, we're so happy that you're joining us for the Toke community meeting with the A2A Railway. And I'm just going through a few items here. I see that Mead is on. Good evening, Mead. We have all of our presenters here. And we're going to get started officially. We still have quite a few people arriving virtually, and we have a few more people trickling in at Fast Eddies. And so we're going to let folks kind of get settled here before we get started at about 6:15. And I do see we have a phone participant. So hello, and thank you for joining us. For our phone participant, we're going to stop every few slides and open up for questions. And the way that you ask a question when you're on the phone is by pressing *9. So when you press the *9 button, it will raise your hand, and we can see that. As soon as you raise your hand, we'll see it. And then we will open your phone line. We have a few phone line callers, actually. So *9 is how you raise your hand to ask a question. And then if you press *9 again, it will unraise your hand if you want to put your hand down. And if you find that you're muted when we open your line, we'll actually see it. I think also if you're muted, you press *6 to unmute yourself. So I'll give reminders though as we're going. I want to make sure that we're all able to participate and that we are able to hear from you as well as provide information tonight. So again, thank you for joining us. I'm Joy Huntington. I've been working on the A2A Railway project since last December. And we're really excited to have a meeting with the residents of Tok and for the surrounding communities that have been able to join us tonight. And we have a presentation for you, and hopefully we can answer some of your questions as well throughout the presentation. And then we will also be having a Q&A at the end of the meeting. So the meeting is, I think we're scheduled to go from 6 to 9. We're also recording the meeting, and really the purpose of recording the meeting is so that we can take really good notes of the questions that you've asked and the comments that you've made tonight. So I just wanted to let you know that the meeting is being recorded, and really it's just going to be used internally so we can keep track of things. So I just wanted to kind of welcome everyone again, and we have some people over at Fast Eddy's getting together. I will continue to do some housekeeping items for everyone. And again, please feel free to use the Q&A box. If you're just joining us, it's down at the bottom of your screen. I will read those questions periodically. And then there's a button for raising your hand if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment throughout our presentation tonight.
Hey, Joy, can you hear me?
I can hear you great.
Okay.
Video looks good.
I did not come in on the presenter's side because something on both my iPad and my iPhone is not just somehow dumped the A2A password and it's not loading it up right now. So if you want to text it to me, I can do that, or I can just stay on this one, whichever works.
Yeah, it looks great to me. And Mead, you must be a panelist, otherwise you wouldn't have a video or anything. You are.
Okay, well, I'm on the, maybe it just went right to my calendar, so that's fine. Okay.
Yeah, I think it did. I think we sent you a panelist invite, and so it should have just made you automatically a panelist.
Okay, I'm gonna get a plug for this iPad, and I'll be right back.
Sounds great. We have about 20 people that have logged in virtually and 2 phone call people on the phone. So if you are on the phone and you're just joining us, the way that you raise your hand for questions is by pressing *9. And the way that you can mute and unmute your line is *6. But everyone is automatically muted on a webinar until the host basically opens your line for asking a question or making a comment. And we have Lindsay Johnson helping with the technology today. So thank you, Lindsay. And Sean Soley is on. He'll be introducing himself here in a little bit. He's actually hosting folks over at Fast Eddy's. So we have some people meeting over there, socially distanced, of course, and having some of their great pizza next door. So really excited about that. And we are getting super close to starting. I'm going to go ahead and turn my video off for a few seconds here. And we are really happy that you're joining us. Thank you. Again, welcome everyone to our Toke community meeting for the A2A Railway Project. And we are very close to getting started here. I see we still have a few people trickling in online, and it sounds like there's still a few more gathering at studies. If you are here in Toke and you are comfortable, I would race over and grab some pizza. I am here, but I'm hosting virtually, moderating virtually, just so that our online folks can get the same quality of audio and everything as the folks here in person. So, and we also have a question in the Q&A box that I wanted to share, and it's just asking if we will be hosting an informational meeting in Fairbanks anytime soon. And I believe Mead gave a presentation recently for the Energy for All Alaskans group in the morning. And I want to say, Mead, did you do a chamber presentation recently as well?
I did one in Fairbanks at
Yes.
the Fairbanks Economic Development Corporation.
Yep.
Certainly since the news we had on Friday night, I've done probably a dozen interviews. So we've done a number of presentations. And while I've been to Toke now probably 3 times to talk to folks on this project and look at land, I haven't had a chance to have a community meeting. So it's fun to be here virtually tonight.
Very good. Well, thank you for the update on some of the Fairbanks conversations that you've had. And I do believe we will have an informational meeting in Fairbanks as well. You know, we've been kind of targeting some of the landowners out here, the native corporations and the communities, of course. And so we will certainly take note of that question and let you know, Marty, if you want to just stay in touch with us. We will, I will provide an email address this evening. And so between Sean Soley and myself, we'll make sure that we let you know when there's a community meeting in Fairbanks. Thank you for your question. And we are almost ready to get started here. I'm waiting to hear if everybody's ready next door at Fast Eddy. So give me just 1 second, and thank you all for your patience. I will be right back. Okay, it sounds like they are very close to being ready, and they're going to start getting situated next door so that we can get started tonight. And we have 26 people that are participating virtually, so thank you for joining us. If you're just getting online right now, I wanted to just point out a few tools tonight for interaction. Of course, we'd love to hear from you, your questions and comments at the end. We'll have a comment time as well at the end of the meeting today. So down at the bottom of your screen, there's a raise hand button. So if you'd like to raise your hand, we will stop and have questions answered throughout the presentation. Every few slides, we'll stop and make sure people are able to raise their hand and ask questions. That's one of the tools. And for our online caller, again, you'd press *9 to raise your hand, and we will open your lines. As we see hands being raised, we will open one line at a time and answer questions. And the other tool that we would love for you to utilize tonight is the Q&A box. So down at the bottom of your screen, for those that are on the computer, there's a Q&A box, and you can ask questions in real time. And when we stop for questions from our participants, we will also check the Q&A box and see if we have any questions there. And we've already been answering a few, and I put my email in the first question. So I think everyone can see that if you want to steal my email there and stay in touch that way. So we are going to get started here. We have Lindsay on tonight, who is going to be running the slideshow for me and Dawn and myself. So thank you, Lindsay, for doing that. And Sean Soley is in person at Fast Eddy's. He gets to share hats and pizza with everybody tonight. We've got Mead and Dawn, of course, presenting. Really happy to have them online tonight. And most of all, thank you for joining us this evening. And once we hear that they are connected, we will get started. Thank you for your patience.
All right, Joy. With that, I have just got the whole community here in Tok ready to go. And we've got about 50 folks here in general. So with that said, I will hand off the mic back to you, and we'll go ahead and kick this off. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sean. And I hope everyone can hear us okay over at Fast Eddy's. Thank you for and we have 28 people that are also participating and with their phone. So glad we have a really great turnout tonight. Lindsay, if you could turn to the next slide, please. Lindsay, can you turn? Okay, thank you. So while we have the agenda slide up right now, I wanted to also just have us introduce ourselves. And for those that are participating online, I wanted to give you one more piece of housekeeping information. Up at the top left-hand corner of your screen, there's a little eye with a circle around it, and that has the meeting ID and your participant ID. Each person gets their own participant ID because you had to this meeting. And if you get kicked off, the internet is not working, and you want to call back in with your phone, I've got an 800 number here that you would use, which is also in your invite for this meeting. And then you use that ID and the participant ID that you see up on the left-hand corner if you press the little I. So I wanted to show that really quickly before we got started. An 800 number, it's actually it's a 669 number, so I'm not sure if it's toll-free. But the phone number to call back in is 1-669-900-6883. So that goes for our presenters as well. If you get kicked off, you can call back in. You dial that phone number, and then you dial the meeting ID, and then your participant ID, which all up on the left-hand corner. So I just wanted to point out that as well, so if we lose anybody, we can jump back on pretty easily. And with that, I will welcome again. I've already introduced myself a few times, but we have people that are joining us. And my name is Jo Huntington, and I'm helping with the stakeholder engagement on the A2A Railway. Really excited to be joining the project team tonight for our community meeting. And I'm going to hand it over to Mead to also introduce himself. And Mead is muted at this time.
Okay. Something needs to be muted, I think, on Sean's phone, or else the rest of us can't hear. Sean, if you have a way to mute your phone. You there?
Muted. Is that better?
Yeah, thanks. Okay, yeah, my name is Mead Treadwell. I am a vice chair for Alaska for A2A Rail. I'm also your former lieutenant governor, and I've been working on the project. Originally, the owners of A2A Rail were investors and also hired us at PT Capital, where I was a few years ago in 2015. And I've been working with the project now on and off for about 5 years.
Thank you, Mead. And Sean, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, for the folks that have not met me, my name is Sean Soley. I'm the Alaska coordinator. I'm here in Tok with the folks here, excited to be at Fast Eddy's to gain their feedback. Really excited about this overall meeting. And Joy, I'll kick it back to you.
Thank you very much. And Don, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Don McCammon. I'm actually down in Missoula, Montana. I work internationally doing railroad engineering, and I have the fun of working with all these people and you doing the engineering for the A2A Railway project and leading that effort. So I'm looking forward to visiting with you.
Thank you, Don. And I wanted to share just what our agenda is tonight. As you can see, we have quite a few things we'd like to cover with you. We'll have Mead presenting and Don for the most part. We're going to give a project overview and talk about the proposed alignment. There's been some refinements in the alignment, and so we'd like to share that with you. We'd also like to talk about the proposed Valdez option, the proposed rail port of entry, and the feasibility studies and the future studies, as well as the economics of the project and opportunities associated with this project. We'd like to talk about support for A2A that has currently been committed, and then especially I know we've had seen some questions about what the timeline is, and so talking about next steps and what the process will be moving forward, and especially how you can be involved in this process as well. And then most importantly, we'll have time for discussion and questions at the end. So can we switch to the next slide, please? We've got a little delay on the slides, I think. Okay. I'll hand it over to you, Mead.
Okay, and I hope the sound is okay. You're warbling a little bit in and out, Joy. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Let me just give you a fast background on this project and the team that's come together. And I want to start by saying that the idea of a rail link between Alaska and the lower 48 has been around for over 100 years. In 1899, E.W. Harriman came up to Alaska, named the glaciers in Prince William Sound, and looked at building a rail link to the state and going on to the Bering Straits. There was another team that was put together $100 million to build a rail line in the first decade of the 20th century, and they didn't. They were stopped by people who did not want the competition from Alaska and Yukon in the mining business. When they built the Alaska Highway in the 1940s, a rail was also a preferred option, but it couldn't be done as fast. Our state's second governor, Wally Hickel, put together a group called the North Commission. It was staffed by his then commissioner of economic development, Frank Murkowski. and they looked at going northwest and south to the lower 48, north to the North Slope and west to Nome, and nobody picked up the pieces there. It turns out that just a couple of years ago, there was such a constraint on oil development and transportation in Alberta and a number of other commodities that couldn't get to the West Coast, that the government of Alberta paid for a study at the Van Horn Institute that suggested this might be possible again. And the state of Alaska was well prepared because Governor Frank Murkowski had made it much easier for the Alaska Railroad to get the right-of-way needed to get to the border. And Sean McCoshen, who read that study, had been contacted by some of the people in the study, that did his diligence and decided to invest in the project as chairman and founder. And Sean is somebody who's built infrastructure all over North America. He's built a lot of grain terminals. He's been an investor and a financier for some time, owns a family company, a family office, which owns about 11 different companies. And he's the sole funder at this point and founder, and has put in over $100 million to get to where we are today with the Alberta-Alaska Railway. And that's really to get us through phase one, and we're working on, we'll talk about the next two phases. Robert Dove, who's with the company, has been leading the work on financing and strategy. Robert is formerly with Bechtel, the very large construction firm, and then with the Carlyle Group, where he headed the infrastructure investments of that very large private equity firm. JP Gladue is president and Canadian Indigenous lead. JP has for some time been head of the Indigenous Chamber of Commerce in Canada. I'm your former Lieutenant Governor, Vice Chair for Alaska. I'll just say that my first encounter with this project was, with these ideas, is when I was a graduate student in the early 1980s. I led a team that did an analysis of the Alaska Railroad, looked at the economics of expansion. I helped write the legislation that brought the Alaska Railroad ownership to the state, and I've been following expansion possibilities for many years. Bill Hayjolt at HDR Engineering, it's a global practice of building railroads all over the world. He's the major leader from the engineering side, and is Don McCammon's colleague. You'll hear from Don today, who's been working on the routing issues and some of the key engineering issues. Doug Ford is working on Indigenous support in Canada. John Katchen is a lawyer with Holland and Hart, who for a long time worked with with Dan Sullivan when he was at the Attorney General's office and Commissioner of Natural Resources. You've had a chance to meet Joy Huntington, and if you're there there in Tok, Sean Soley, who's our Alaska coordinator, a Fairbanks guy, who we were very lucky to hire. We were very lucky to hire Joy as well. That's the Alaska team and some of the leaders of the Canadian team. Let's go to the next slide real fast.
Mead, I'm hearing that our audio is not coming through the best. Can you maybe speak a little bit closer to the microphone, possibly?
I will do my best. Is that better?
I've been able to hear you well the whole time, but I think over at Fast Eddy's, it was sounding a little bit like you were down a hallway. So let me see if it is better for them, but I would continue, and we'll see if that helps. Thank you.
Okay, so here are two maps. The first map shows the Alaska Railroad, which goes from Seward and Anchorage, as you know, up to Fairbanks. That's 512 miles to Fairbanks and North Pole. You also know that there was an extension approved from North Pole to Delta Junction called the Northern Rail Extension a few years ago, where they built a bridge across the Tanana River. What we're proposing is to join up with the Alaska Railroad, whether it's at North Pole or whether they build Delta, and go down through the Yukon Territory, across the lower southwest portion of the Northwest Territories, and hook into the Canadian rail lines in Alberta. So that's the proposal. It's about 1,600 miles total, about 200 miles in Alaska, and it would tie into the North American rail system. It's got many different advantages. There's quite a bit of resources in central Canada and central part of North America that need a way to get to market because ports are congested on the West Coast. There's also a huge opportunity for container traffic coming in from Asia or going out to Asia because a rail coming from the middle part of North America to say the port in Anchorage is 3 to 5 days faster in either direction than going to say a port like Tacoma and getting on a ship, which is slower. So that's one of the advantages, especially for things that are just-in-time delivery for a factory, or my daughter has taught me about fast fashion, where sometimes something will just be a big hit and the department stores will want to order a lot more stuff and they were going to want to get it here as fast as they can without paying for air cargo. So that's the view of the rail extension. Let's go to the next slide real fast. I mentioned it's 1,600 miles. In Alaska, it's 190 miles, so about 200. And if we do a spur from Tok down to Valdez, that's another 270 miles. The Northern Rail extension that I mentioned is 83 more miles. So we're, all told we'd be a little more than 200 miles. There is a bridge across Tanana and the Tanana River in Salcha that was built, and there's existing track from North Pole to Tidewater. We see a set of rail configurations that would be 2 locomotives, 96 cars, 3 locomotives, 96 cars, and 2 locomotives, and call that a unit train. We're looking 8 to 10 of those unit trains a day, and they would be carrying bulk commodities. It'd be mixed freight and intermodal, carrying containers as well. Let's go to the next slide for a second. It's going to be a heavy haul, standard gauge railway. You know, the railway that crosses from Skagway toward Whitehorse is narrow gauge. This would be standard gauge that would hook up with the rest of the rail systems in North America. It would carry general cargo, bulk dry and liquid cargo, bulk cargo like bundled steel, lumber, refrigerated cargo, roll on and roll off cargo, container and passenger cargo. It will also carry options for the military. It also makes it easier to move a military unit if you need to, and it will help support Eielson, Fort Wainwright, Fort Greely, Clear Air Force Base, Joint Base Elmendorf, etc. But you can see it's a number of different commodities. And when we talk about the bulk dry and liquid cargo, grain has got a constraint right now. Potash and sulfur have got a constraint. Bitumen is solid oil, kind of like asphalt or charcoal briquettes. It could be carried in that form. When you warm it, it liquefies, but we'd be carrying it in a semi-solid state as it goes along our railroad route. So that's the basic project overview. And let's go to the next slide for a second. What I'd like to do at this point is be familiar with this map, and I'm going to ask Don McCammon, who's been the guy who's in charge of putting this map together, of which lands we would cross, and just Don will take you through the route. And I will say there was one question from somebody who attended, a citizen who attended the meeting in Delta. We are very, very interested in hearing everybody's hearings and if everybody's feelings and concerns. And we obviously want this to be a plus for our communities, not a negative. So we're very interested in getting your comments at the end of this meeting. But before I just turn it over to Don, are there any questions about the project or the economics at this point before we go on?
Thank you, Mead. And just a reminder for folks, if you want to ask a question, you can raise your hand down at the bottom of your screen. And if you are one of our few folks on the phone line, you would press the *9 buttons to raise your hand. And we do have some questions that have been asked in the Q&A box. It is mostly, I know there was one about the time frame for the project, which we will discuss in more detail later in the presentation. And then quite a few questions about the sound quality. Thanks for letting us know, guys, if you can hear well or not. I'm gonna keep my video off. I think the internet connection was a little bit unstable. And so I hope that the sound on my part has improved with having the video off. I'll keep checking in with my folks too to see if that's helping or not. And I haven't seen any hands raised. Sean, do you have any questions or anything from our folks over at Fast Eddies?
Oh, we certainly have comments, but if folks are okay here, let's wait until the end, as I think that'll be the best way to go about getting comments from this group out to into the meeting. Does that sound okay, Joy?
Oh, that sounds perfect. Definitely. So good. If someone does have a question though, and it's pressing and it needs to be addressed prior to moving on with the slides, just ping me and let me know, and we'll be sure to stop for that. But it looks like we are good to go, and there's not any hands raised with anybody online or on the phone. So I will hand it over to you, Don, to present on the proposed alignment.
Thanks, Joy, and thanks, Mead. What you're seeing on this slide is what we call the main line alignment, extending from the US-Canada border all the way to Delta Junction, where it will connect with the proposed end of the NRE extension that the Alaska Railroad received its approval for from the Surface Transportation Board back in 2010. The alignment has been developed at a high level. We've worked it down to about 1,000-foot wide corridor, and we're at a stage where these type of meetings are critical as we move forward, because we need to hear, as you see the alignment and see how it may impact you or your communities, that we need your input on things that we may not see from the level of information that we have, so we get your local knowledge and take that into account as we move the design forward. We've looked at some of the parcels that we crossed.
Don?
Yes.
Don, Sean here in the TOC meeting. Apologies, folks, but we're having some technical errors with our internet connection. Can we go ahead and just take about a 30-second pause so that I can reconnect here and then resume? If so, that would be much appreciated.
Yeah, and Soli, if you have a chance, why don't you just phone in regular as well?
Already taking care of it.
Thank you for your patience, everyone. We love having new tools to use to be able to connect with you, even given the current circumstances. But of course, there's pros and cons, and we appreciate your patience while we get our folks here in TOC reconnected. Something that has, just really quickly, something that has come up a few times on previous meetings is whether or not we would be able to share the PowerPoint presentation. And the answer is absolutely yes. So if you would like the presentation sent to you, just shoot me an email. I put my email address in one of the first questions that was asked today, but I can share it again towards the end of the meeting. So just shoot an email to myself or to Sean, and we'd be happy to get you the presentation. And while we're waiting for Sean to get back on, we actually do have a question, and I think this could be probably directed to Don maybe, or Mead, but it's just asking if there would be a depot in TOC.
I believe the answer is there would be a depot in TOC. We're talking about several different facilities in TOC right now. The one that we will talk about in this presentation is a functional equivalent of the border, where in our discussions with customs, we got approval to plan for the customs facility to be in TOC itself rather than way out there at the end of the Ladue River Valley. And that means that people who work for customs can be at their kids' hockey games or baseball games or home with their families at night. And instead of living remotely, 80 or 90 miles away. The second thing is that we would have to have a depot that passengers could get on and off as part of that customs facility. So we would have that. And we also see an opportunity to transfer cargo on and off for the road system, because that's the first place that you would hit the road system in Alaska. So it would be a way to get things like lumber off the train at Tok, as an example, whether it's something you've ordered from Fairbanks or ordered from Calgary or Edmonton or Chicago or wherever. So the answer is yes, we haven't specifically planned the depot yet, but we do expect to see the customs facility, some way to move cargo on and off, and some way to move passengers on and off at Tok. Don, what did I forget? Maybe a sorting yard. We're not sure yet about a sorting yard, but we're thinking about it.
You know, there could be a major yard there, especially if the Valdez business case works out. And we need to address passengers across the whole system, so that has a wider decision-making look that we need to get into as we progress future studies as well, Mead.
Thank you for hitting on the passenger side, Don, because a question that came up in the Q&A box was, will there be passenger cars that would allow transport from Fairbanks to Tok and Fairbanks to Greeley?
And we haven't looked at that specific yet, so that would be a comment we'd take in and need to take a look as we look at the overall network and our operations plan as well, and see what works forward and what the A2A, as it works in with its relationship with the state of Alaska and the stakeholders, wants to move forward. And we also need to take that into account with the Alaska Railroad as well, because that would move over as part of their railroad.
Great, thank you, Don. And a very appropriate question has been asked. How will this railway contribute to better internet access for rural communities?
Very simply, one of the facilities that will be constructed along the railroad is a fiber optic line that will serve as the backbone for the entire signal system and communication system for the railroad. But the needs of the railroad will only use about half of the capacity of that entire conduit with all the fibers in it. So that leaves a lot of fibers available for connectivity, which I know just from what we've had down here in Montana, elsewhere in rural areas are sorely needed, and I think will be well liked by the rest of the communities along the line.
Thank you, Don. And another question from the Q&A box is, will this A2A railway help alleviate all the military traffic on the Richardson Highway during military exercises between Fairbanks and Fort Greely? These exercises create a huge traffic issue when transporting all the troops and equipment. Very good question.
So, Don, let me just say that what the military does and decides to do is up to the military, but we will give them another option.
And I know that was discussed with the Alaska Railroad's Northern Rail Extension. We've got to re-engage with Fort Greely and Fort Wainwright to work through what their intended use of the line is. And as Mead said, what the Department of Defense and the Army and Air Force decides to do is kind of in their own world, but it certainly would be available for them to use.
Thank you guys for those great questions and for the answers. And I'm seeing here if our folks, it sounds like they're reconnected next door. So please proceed, Don. Thank you.
So we left off with you looking at the route, which we call the main line from the border. It follows the Ladue River Basin, goes underneath the mountains between the Ladue and the Tanana Basin, and then basically follows the Alaska Highway all the way to Delta Junction. It meanders a little bit away from the highway and crosses the highway. We've got some very strict design requirements because the railroads, we'll talk about that in a little bit, what our standards are. And we also took a look as we developed this alignment to try to avoid developments, houses, residences, agriculture lands, and wetlands as well, and provide for right-angled crossings of the streams and rivers. So you'll see as we get zoomed in on some of the views on this alignment, what we've done to try to improve the alignment to better fit the topography, as well as the features and the development that's occurred along the way. Let's go ahead and look at the next slide. So this is the, like I just mentioned, the engineering considerations. From an environmental standpoint, we want to try to follow a previously used corridor, try to not create development across greenfield areas as much as possible. Again, that's where design standards allow. We've got a very strict set of design standards to keep the railroad safe and make sure it can operate and be feasible to move those trains. We're going to use side hill construction to minimize these big fills and cuts, but we've got to mitigate the permafrost as well as we look at that. So it's a very carefully chosen decision process where we put this. We need to reduce our tunnel lengths. If you will, the tunnel that we have is 1.6 miles long. The tunnel itself costs $26,000 or so a foot to construct. If you will, it's a small car that we're buying or spending for every foot of a tunnel length. That's our single biggest, most expensive feature that we have. And following close behind are the bridges and bridge heights. These tall, long bridges on some of these crossings will also be very expensive. And we need to keep our grades low to keep those crossings lower. Right-angle crossings improve the crossings, minimize the impacts of the streams and rivers, avoiding wetlands, as well as parallel alignments in the floodplains. You'll actually see that in some of the, changes we made from the original alignment that was done from a study called the VHI study, where the alignment was put down through basically the middle of the floodplain, and that would cause all sorts of water and flooding problems. And with the Tanana, that's the last thing you want to be working with. We want to stay on the opposite sides of roads when we're passing national parks and noted fisheries, so we're not impacting those. And from an operational standpoint, our trains need to stay above 10 miles per hour. If they get below 10 miles an hour, they start stalling out. And what can happen, if you can imagine it, steel wheels will spin on the steel rails and actually burn them and melt into the rails and put a little divot. We call them rail burns. Those can crack the rail and potentially cause derailments. So we need to watch our speeds. We also have to make sure the trains can stop and brake safely. And we don't want too much forces pulling or pushing the train that either pulls the train apart or pushes the train together, and either one could cause derailments. So those are the things we need to look at and what we have looked at to refine this alignment and get to where we're at today. Go ahead, let's go to the next slide. So I like this graphic, and this is one of the benefits, I think, of the metric system over the English system, is this one graph. If you think of your typical 6% highway grade as you go up the passes, Thompson Pass, if you drive that, is probably a little bit more than 6%. It's very steep. From a railroad perspective, we're trying to keep this grade at 1.5% maximum. That means for every kilometer, we're moving 15 meters vertically. In the English system, it's a little bit messy. For every 5,280 feet, we're only going up 79 feet. So it's a very flat grade. And when we put these terminals in, like we talk about the facility for the port of entry, the yards and service areas that we need to have, those grades essentially need to be flat or even bowl shaped, so we keep the cars in the bowl and they don't have a chance to roll out. So these are some of the considerations we have from an engineering standpoint that we need to look at. Go ahead. The other thing, and I like this graph because it shows Alaska during a dry period of its history. This is actually a different project that we worked on, but it really illustrates Very similar terrain to what we have in Alaska, although it's a little bit greener and more trees and vegetation. But it gives you an idea of what we've had to look at terrain-wise. And then we take our little red string and start working it through the terrain, keeping our standards, our curve standards, and our grade standards, and try to fit that alignment with the terrain. This just gives you an idea of when we first started working with this, and way back in 2012 with the VHI study and some of the others, this is what they did. And if you can imagine when they did this 125, 150 years ago, some of the first railroads, this was all done by horseback and old-time surveyors out there for months and months on the end, doing this by hand. So it's a lot easier these days to do it by computer. Go ahead, let's move ahead. So this gives you an idea of some of the alignment process that we've worked through. The purple alignment that you see there, which is towards the bottom of the screen, is the original alignment that was developed 2012 to 2015. We call that the VHI alignment. It actually had two tunnels, partially was built on top of the Ladue River, and had some really nasty crossings of the Ladue. And then as it came out onto the Alaska Highway, portions of it actually built on the Alaska Highway, or would have caused major landslides on the Alaska Highway and shoved the Alaska Highway out into Tanana. None of that was really what we would desire for a railroad. We did the green alignment as an interim alignment, and then we got looking at it and scratching our heads a little bit more and realized there was a better route, and that's that middle alignment. We're the one, if you see some green and reds as we go through, that's where we've got our 1,000-foot wide corridor, and that white line, and you see that yellow push pin, that if you get really good at it and can read it, it says tunnel. That's where our tunnel is that goes underneath the mountains crossing between the Ladue and the Tanana. So that just gives you an idea. We avoid all the work on the Alaska Highway. We stay away from that. We have one single shorter tunnel than the two longer tunnels that were there originally. And it's actually a shorter alignment than what the green one or the Van Horn alignment. So it works out a lot better. Those are things that we've looked at. And along the Ladue River, we've really looked at avoiding the Ladue, staying out of the floodplain, cleaning up the crossings that we have there. And there's some historical trails as well that go through the Ladue that we've worked at. We know there's one area that we'll probably need to mitigate as we work through the environmental process. But for the most part, we've tried to stay away. Those are the known features. And part of as you work with Joy and Solly as we move ahead with this project and ourselves, is getting that information from you for local conditions, the road we can't see through the trees that you use to get access to your back 40-acre lot, those type of things. Those are things that we need to know and work with you on as we move ahead. So let's go to the next slide. You all might be a little bit more interested in this area. This is actually the Tok area. You can see the purplish alignment up above everything. That's the original Van Horn alignment. It had a crossing separated from the existing highway crossing by a bit. And where it was located as we looked at the Tanana River was not in the best spot. And then it went right across the floodplain, again, not desirable. And then as it came down along the Alaska Highway west of Tok, it actually crossed through several developed areas and houses and residences. So none of that was desirable. We took a look at it, moved the alignment closer to the highway. We avoid the cemetery and the park, and then work our way around the city of Tok, staying away from developed areas. We know we have some local roads that will need to be crossed. We'll be looking at either grade separating or relocating those to be put in a better spot. And then we'll have to figure out as we move ahead on the project, and if the alignment to Valdez pencils out, we need to figure out what we'll need and where we'll need to put facilities to provide local railroad service to the area. As Meade mentioned, the track to provide for unloading of box cars, flat cars, other freight that might be delivered to the area, as well as load out freight. and haul it off to market. So those are things that we need to do. And we'll talk in a little bit about the border facility or the port of entry facility, where you see those 3 push pins kind of in the center of the screen. Those are the limits of that port of entry area. We need to be able to have a full-length train on each side and cross through. So as you can imagine, this facility gets rather long, and it's got several tracks in it, plus a lot of buildings that will go through there. And you can see Tetland Junction on the other side, so you can kind of orient how this railroad fits in with your community. And let's go ahead to the next slide. And then again, we looked at Dot Lake. The original alignment went right through the village. Not the best place to be. So we looked at going around, following the contours and trying to avoid as many impacts as we have. And then again, as you look to the left, you can see land that has been subdivided, but we don't know, and we actually think that land is still owned by or managed by the DNR. But we actually went through the back tier of lots there because the front tier had a huge development in it and had several other lots that looked like we should stay away from it. So again, following the topography, if we go farther north in the Tanana, we drop off a bench into the Tanana floodplain. So we're trying to get a best fit for the alignment overall to work with the topography, the development that's occurred, and the land use that's occurring in the area. So we go on. And then we get into not Dot Lake. Well, I got Dot Lake on the mind. I did this last time too. We get into Delta Junction itself. This is our original refined alignment and corridors we worked through. But again, as we visited with the community of Delta Junction, and you can see the green line coming in from the left-hand side of the screen, that's the NRE approved alignment, which essentially ended at the Richardson Highway. We need to work through how the NRE is connecting to the A2A project. That will be a grade separated crossing, as will other crossings of the Alaska Highway. We've got some developed areas that, as we visited with the community people and subdivisions in the area, that we need to address. And if we look at the next slide, and by the way, that orangish colored line is the original VHI alignment, so you can get an idea of how much we've done. This is, it looks messy, and I chuckle at Mead's comment. This is a messy slide. But the key on this thing is to look at what are all the issues that we've got to look at as we look at an alignment, where our original refined alignment was. And then as we visited with the people in Delta Junction, we realized, you know, there's better places to be and possibly better places. It is a give and take. Instead of being along the highway between the subdivision and the highway, if we go along the south and west edge of that subdivision, you see, that may be okay for some, but then what happens to the people who may own those back lots? We have an alignment that might work through the Fort Wainwright, Fort Greely area. That needs to be worked out with the Fort Wainwright, Fort Greely, the Corps of Engineers, and the Department of Defense. So, and what their plans are for. There's numerous other smaller changes in the alignment that need to look at. That just gives you an idea of the tasks that we've got ahead, and that's where we need to get some of your feedback as we work through this on, you know, this is not too bad of a place, or, you know, what do I want to do with my property? It's not developed now. Those are all things that we need to address as we go move forward. So let's go to the next slide. And again, this is some of the close-ups of those same areas around Delta Junction with some of the options that we've looked at to avoid owners. You've got the blue or teal colored line at the bottom across the Department of Defense lands, and then several other options to the north side. Again, we stay entirely south of the Alaska Highway with this work of trying to match up with where the Alaska Railroad comes in with its NRE. And that purple line now that you see up towards the top, that's the original Van Horn Institute alignment. And we looked at that and saw what it crossed, the developed areas, the agriculture areas, and with the realization where the NRE came in, we said we needed to try to stay south of the highway. Go ahead. And again, these are close-ups of what we already talked about in Delta Junction area. And some you can see a little bit better, maybe some of the alignments that we're looking at in that area need to talk through. And what needs to be done in this area is this also, and when you asked the question about will the Army be able to move their vehicles on the railroad versus traveling on the highway and messing with all the road traffic on the highway, this is one of those spots that we need to work out and fit in both a small yard for service of freight to the Delta Junction and picking up freight from Delta Junction, but also what the Army wants to have as far as facilities that may, or if they want it, facilities to serve the base. And those are all things that we need to work out in the future. Why don't we, with this one, I think with the next slide coming out, it's a good spot, Joy, to take a break and see if there's any questions.
Sounds great, Don. So I don't see any hands raised at this time. And I know Sean was going to kind of wait for the end to have people next door ask questions. So again, for our folks that have called in, you press *9 to raise your hand. And for everyone that is participating virtually with their computers, you have a raise hand button down towards the bottom of your screen. If you would like to ask a question of Don or of Mead before we keep going, please raise your hand at this time. And we do have one question in the Q&A box, and that question is, will individual landowners be able to access more detailed information about the proposed alignment route to evaluate how it may impact their property, such as KMZ files?
So I'd like to start with that question by saying if you are in Tok or if you're online, just to individually reach out to us, and we're certainly willing to share with you what this is. I think the main thing that, and the reason why we haven't really filed these documents in a large public setting as yet, we certainly distributed them there tonight and in Delta the other night, is because this is kind of a first look. It's to engage the community and landowners to see what works and what doesn't. And we know we can't make it work for everybody, but we're going to try to make it work for as many people as possible. And you know, there, as Don mentioned, you know, there's an option to go north of town in Delta. There's an option to come south a little bit further and go in through the military base. We're looking at all those options. And, you know, there were some places when we initially started looking at this that were full-fledged subdivisions on the map. And then when we went and looked at the places, there were nobody had built theirs yet. So there may be some options. But the answer is, we're happy to share with you around the time of your individual property, as long as there's an understanding that nothing that you've seen on these charts here is totally firm, except for, you know, the point where we're going to cross the U.S.-Canada border. I think everything else is and the point where we link up with the NRE extension. So and those things conceivably could change too, but we've got two endpoints. Don, I don't know if you want to talk about that, but anybody who specifically wants to have that conversation, we want to have that conversation with you, and Sean Soley and Joy Huntington can set that up.
And I know, having been working with the A2A team for a while, their goal is to be as open and above board and discuss freely with individual landowners as the questions come in and the needs are realized. I'm used to railroads and one of them I used to work for that used to run roughshod, and that just does not work in this day and age. So we very much want to get that win-win scenario working with everybody and be as open as we can. And you'll hear later on some of the environmental process again that provides additional opportunities for input and actually weigh in on some of the alignment choices that can be made. This is not a project that will be done in the dark. That will be above board and open, and I really appreciate that atmosphere and working with A2A as well, and I think you will also.
Thanks, guys. We have a couple more open questions in the Q&A box. One of them is, when would surveying for Delta Junction and Tok begin?
We've been working with the state of Alaska level survey work, so if you will, it's already done. But we do need to go through and get additional detail survey. That may take place early next spring after the winter thaw when the ground is available. We're working through those with some of the native corporations as we talk and trying to work through proposals on that now. But that's our plan, is as we move forward, we'll be getting some additional survey. Some of the parts of the project will get surveyed before other parts, so it's going to be an incremental basis, if you will. We won't do the entire survey all at once, but that's what our plan is now anyway.
Great, thank you, Don. And another question is, will there be unlimited access across the tracks to access private property, or only at specific crossing points? Very good question.
I think it's an excellent question. From railroad safety, we need to try to work with each of you on where you would like to cross. If you have land that's going to be split and it's a significant enough parcel that you want to retain the parcel on the other side. We also know there's traditional uses, access to hunting and fishing areas that need to be maintained as well. But we need to do that at safe areas. And so we'll work with you, identify those, put in crossings. We'll try to get as many grade separated crossings as possible and work through that. And that's kind of like the next phase of where we need to go, is start identifying those. And at the very least, during the environmental process and the NEPA process, those get identified for sure, because they get, if you will, codified on the agreements that need to be made and the stipulations that will come out of those environmental processes and what needs to be done for the project. So will it be a free-for-all? I think that would be dangerous, both for the railroad and for the people. But we want to work with you to make sure your needs are met and be able to provide safe crossings where they are needed.
And if I could just only add to that, it used to be that there was a lot more people needing the flag stop service on the Alaska Railroad, say north of Talkeetna, up toward Chase and Healy, and well, actually, not even getting to Healy, up toward Cantwell. And now, you know, the residents have been able to work that out with four-wheeler roads and kind of designated crossings where there's great visibility at both ends when the road kind of crosses that. And we'll have to work that out. And if you have there was somebody in Delta, for example, who spoke up and said, well, you don't cross my land, but you do cross the path I use to get to my land. Can we talk? And the answer is yes, we're very willing to talk.
Thank you, guys. And before I read the last question here in the Q&A box, I just want to remind people that you can press *9 to raise your hand if you're on the phone. And again, raise your hand with the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen if you're logged on with your computer. And we will continue with our slide presentation. And some of the questions that were asked earlier in the Q&A box, I know the answers are kind of coming up related to numbers of permanent jobs and things like that. So we will get to the answers on those as we continue with our slideshow. But for now, we've got one more question here in the Q&A box. What side of the Alaska Highway is the A2A plan to be on through the area where the original Alaska Highway, which is on the National Register of Historic Places, intersects? Approximately milepost 1382 to 1384. I know you have that memorized, Don, so.
Don, why don't you go up to, I think what we're talking about, and if the questioner's on, you're welcome to speak. Are you talking about basically where the old Alaska Highway is near Tetland Junction? Or are we talking about another spot up near Dot Lake? I'm just trying to
Yeah,
figure out.
if Marty, you want to raise your hand, we can turn your microphone on if you'd like to clarify that for, or we can just go ahead. Yep. So Lindsay, would you please open Marty's line so he can speak? There you, and Marty, you are now permitted to speak, but you need to unmute yourself down at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Thank you. There you
Can
go.
you hear me?
We can hear you
Yes.
great, Marty. Thank you.
Okay, at somewhere in the viewpoint of about 37 miles east of Delta Junction, there is about a 3-mile stretch of the original Alaska Highway. Comes off the highway at about milepost 1384, comes back into the highway about milepost 1382 roughly. And that stretch of the highway is the original Alaska Highway, untouched as it was when it was built, and is the only remaining stretch of the original Alaska Highway that it still exists in the state of Alaska. And my question is, are you going to preserve that in its existing state?
So Marty, this is Mead. Sully, can you try to move to the section of the map that covers that? Just so I think I think you need to go up a couple of slides.
Yeah, it's going to put you about 2 miles west of the Johnson River.
Okay.
And it's Lindsay operating the slides tonight, Mead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Lindsay. Okay.
Let her know where you'd like her to go. Yeah. How far ahead?
Yeah, Lindsay, you need to go backwards about 6 slides. A few more. Moriette. 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 Keep on there. One more, I think. One more back, Lindsay. Oop, that's forward.
I feel like we're square dancing or something, guys.
Yeah.
Like PowerPoint square
Yeah.
dance.
So
Yeah, sorry guys, we're having there's a delay when I'm shooting the slides. So right now I'm on the proposed alignment slide. Do I need to go forward or backward?
we want to stay on proposed alignment slides, and I think.
It's backwards.
You sure, Don? Okay.
Yes. It's that very first one that shows the alignment overall from the border to Delta Junction. So it is back. There it is.
There it is. Okay.
Yep. So I think you're somewheres in the Dry Creek area. Is that, Marty, is that about where you're talking about?
Yes, we're looking at about probably 3 miles west of the Dry Creek community.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't have it zoned in, but I'm pretty sure in that area we're to the south and west of the highway. If we, one of the things we need to do coming up, which would be that historical and cultural resource survey, if we find we've got that is definitely one of those items that's to be avoided. So we'll look at that and work through our alignment to miss it. And we haven't done that historical cultural resource survey yet. So that will definitely be one of those items that we get picked up, Marty. And thanks for pointing it out because
Thank you.
that's
If you were on the south side of the highway, that would require 2 crossings of that original highway. So yeah, please take a look at that.
Yep, will do.
Thank you.
Great question, Marty, and thank you for jumping online to clarify that. I think we can probably turn Marty's mic off, but definitely raise your hand, Marty, if you have another question in the future. And if you want to press your raise hand button, it will lower your hand. And with that, thank you, Marty. It did go down. And I don't see any more open questions in the Q&A box. There was one asking just to repeat an answer that they missed, and we'll come back to that at the end. So I think we can continue with our slide presentation. Thank you guys for stopping for questions. And I hope everyone out there can hear okay. Sean, if you're having any trouble hearing next door, please let me know.
So we wanted to give everybody just a feel for what some of the construction processes and what it's going to look like. Thankfully, we've progressed a little bit with our construction methods and equipment since the turn of the 1900s. This is actually the tunnel construction. It's not changed much, although people wear hard hats, and we've got drill jumbos, and we'll use blasting equipment and things like that. But the basic process is the same. You start with a smaller arch up on top, work that ahead, and then work in the main part of the shaft. It's a horseshoe-shaped tunnel. That's most efficient. Some of you may have heard tunnel boring machines and that type of equipment. The Whittier tunnel was built. It's a little bit wider, not quite as horseshoe-shaped as a regular railroad tunnel because it's also passing a two-lane highway through there as well as the railroad tracks. So that's what your tunnel looks like, and that gives you an idea of the challenge we have where we have them. There's the one tunnel between the Ladue and the Tanana, and then if we go towards Valdez, that actually has 5 tunnels on it. So we've got our work cut out in some very challenging terrain to build this railroad. Let's go ahead to the next slide. Speaking of the Valdez alignment, just to give you a feel for what we've got, 270 miles. We crossed the TAPS pipeline 7 times. Those would all be grade separated, not just for the pipeline, but to allow the pipeline maintenance people to get access. We've got grade separated road crossings. We've identified 62 bridges, and then we've identified the various tunnels, with the longest being 2.9 miles and the shortest 2,300 feet. And so we've got basically 31,000 plus feet of tunnels, and then the terminal would be down at Valdez, Alaska. So again, it's not a cakewalk to get down there, but it is feasible to build. And we've got to look at the port area as we move forward. It's one of our future studies. And then look at refining this corridor as well, because the survey was a lot better quality and accuracy along the Alaska Highway than it is down on this route. So when you talk about what survey we may have going forward, to refine this route, we actually need to get some survey to get to the accuracy that's similar to what we have along the Alaska Highway. Let's go ahead with the next slide. At the rail port of entry station, as Meade mentioned, we looked at 3 locations for this. One is the actual border area. Everybody thinks it's really nice to be in the border, except if you're the people who would have to drive there in the middle of winter and go up a 50-plus mile road to get from the Alaska Highway up to that border station and live there in that remote area as you're working, because you probably don't want to do that every day. So that was one site. The other site was near Tetlin Junction. The concern from the border protection people was that a portion of that route, because of the grades and the terrain and the curvature and where everything fit, would actually have been built over the Tetlin, the highway going north out of Tetlin Junction. So that was not desired from a security standpoint. This port of entry is fully fenced and is 24/7 secure area. The trains move in and out of, as well as any personnel or people moving in and out of it. The other site we looked at was the Tok area, near the Tok itself, providing places for housing, food. Workers just had a short trip to get there, a lot better. And that, as we worked with the border protection people, worked out as the selected area to go. We've got more process to go through before it's all finalized, but that is the apparent front runner for the location for the port of entry. We've got a few slides just to give you an idea of what that port of entry station would look like, so you can see what would get built near Tok. Go to the next slide. So this is a schematic of what it looks like. The center, you see where it says United States and Canada, that's where this scanner is. It's a high energy X-ray machine, if you will, that scans and is able to scan through the cars so they can see if there's any dangerous cargo or anything that should not be in the cars. We've got admin buildings, that's in the center. And these tracks are some 13,000 feet long. And at each end there's inspection facilities and buildings to inspect the cars. If we find a car has something dangerous or something suspicious in it, they need to take that car out of the train. We've got room to set the car out, park the train on the side while traffic can still run on the tracks. That's why you see 2 tracks, long tracks through there. And then the car can be brought inside a building and unloading, or if it's a container, it's unloaded off the car and then brought inside the building and unloaded. So all these facilities, some are rather large. And the trains, we're hoping, will not have to stop here. The goal is to keep the trains moving so you have better operations of your railroad. But this is going to be operating 24/7, 365. And as you can kind of see, with 13,000 feet each way, it's pretty close to about 5 miles, 6 mile long facility that'll be running along the north side of Tok. Next slide. Some of the buildings, so you can see what they look like. The scanning building, lower right-hand corner, these would be all engineered steel frame buildings, insulated, designed for the climate. And the scanner, as we covered, again, for wintertime operations. And then you've got the admin buildings is where they'll actually have the offices and the scanner reading equipment. So just gives you an idea of just some of the sizes of the equipment and spaces that needs to be done. And that overall area, that's close to 500 feet of length along the track that we're looking at for the center facility. Let's go on to the next slide. And then you can kind of get an idea of what the inspection facilities look like with the railroad car, box car fitting inside the building so they can unload it. The container gets lifted off the container car and then moved inside there so they can inspect it on the inside, especially with inclement weather and snow. So this just gives you an idea of just some of the features of the project that would be built around Tok if once the final decision is made that this is where the port of entry needs to be made. And again, we've gotten the head nods from the border protection area that this is where they'd like to be, but we still have a bit of a process to go through to finalize it. Next slide. Meade, do you want me to toss this back to you?
Yeah, I'll take it from here, Don, real fast. Let me just say that when you've got a big linear project like this, you need to know that you've got enough business to pay the bills. You need to know that you've got a good design that will meet environmental standards. You have to have very good relations with your neighbors. You have to have good business relations with people who are going to be partners for a long time. And I would consider the community of Tok, the Tanacross Corporation, Tetlin Tribe, Tetlin Corporation, all as partners that will be part of this rail link a lot longer than I will be probably as a guy who's 64 years old. And I guess the main thing I wanted to let you know is that there was a pre-feasibility report done by the government of Alberta and a large amount of work working with that at the University of Alaska. McKinsey and Company, which is a global consulting firm, has been doing an economic analysis for us that's helping us identify who's going to be using the railroad for shipping and a number of other issues related to finance. And HDR Engineering, which Don represents, has been doing an analysis of the pre-feasibility costs. And what we're trying to do is by getting this route alignment down, we'll have a much better view of exactly what it costs, which is what the finance people will need to know. So that is a process that what I'm really saying is that decisions we make with you in TOC early on that affect the economics of the project, we want to have an early discussion and work well together, because in order to bring this about, we've got to get to conclusions in a number of different places in the world all at once. Let's go to the next slide. There are future studies to be done on engineering, refining the route survey and alignment that we talked about. Operations, we've got to make sure that, you know, one of the things with operations, this is primarily a single track railroad, but if we're going to have 10 unit trains coming and going, we've got to figure out how many sidings to have when they meet and where we're going to be sorting cars. Turns out that TOC could be a very, very good place to do sorting of cars once we've taken a group of containers off a ship, even as far away as Anchorage. It would be about 600 miles or 500 miles from Anchorage, but they'd all be headed south. So TOC may be a good place to do that. And so we're looking at that as well. We're also doing the Valdez port study because a large amount of our cargo would be going out in heated oil tankers. There's already a lot of facilities in Valdez that support oil shipment. There's not as many facilities in Cook Inlet, even though there has been shipment of oil out of Cook Inlet now since really the early 60s. And so we're doing kind of an optimization of whether or not we would go ahead with the Valdez route. And we certainly intend to be working with the Valdez port regardless, because there's a lot of intermodal traffic that could come in Valdez and go out on the railroad. So let me go to the next slide real fast. Economics, the question was asked earlier on, what kind of job impact? And let's just think about it this way. It's a $17 billion project, about $4 billion of which Canadian dollars, so about $3 billion of which would be spent in Alaska without the Valdez option. We would be spending more like $5 billion in Alaska if we do Valdez. About $7 billion Canadian in the Yukon, $3.4 billion in the Northwest Territories, and close to $6 billion in Alberta. The impact on GDP in terms of an increase in Alaska, it'd probably be a 10% increase of our GDP of about 50 billion, or about $5 billion a year worth of economic activity. And as far as employment is concerned, it'd be about 4,200 temporary jobs, about 3,200 permanent jobs. And if we haven't really broken it down to say how many would be in the TOC area versus the Delta area versus Fairbanks, et cetera, except that I do want to say this. TOC is in a strategic location where you would have the customs facility. It would be the first place that you would be able to take goods off the railroad, because you can't take them off before you get to customs if it's coming in from Canada. If it's goods that's leaving Alaska going into Canada, it's also a good place to have an offtake spot, and you have the connection with two highways there. So that's very important. You also do have the kind of land that Tanacross selected, that Tetlin selected years ago to be able to service a transportation hub. And so there's other elements there. So at any rate, of those 3,200 permanent jobs, we could see a lot in railroad maintenance, a lot in railroad operations. There's probably going to be a crew change, basically from Canadian crews as they come across the Alaska border. There's several different kind of labor options there that we'll be working on. And so we see this as a large economic opportunity for TOC. Next slide. In terms of Alaska as a whole, the McKinsey analysis looked at all the different sectors of our economy, and whether it's the public sector or oil and gas and mining. I mean, we know that there are a number of new mine prospects near you in Tetlin and on Tetlin land, and some in Canada just over the Yukon border. There's logistics and trade, construction, manufacturing, telecom, agriculture, and forestry. And so we see a very large impact on the public sector in terms of increased tax revenue, a large impact on oil and gas and mining sector, especially with the capability. You could have a mine as far away as Ambler in the Brooks Range that may want to send its concentrates to smelters in Canada. So that would be using this railroad headed down toward Canada. You may have Canadian hard rock mines that want to send their concentrates to smelters in China. And so again, this is something where the value of this railroad would be significant to help that as well. Logistics and trade, we see increased container traffic. We all know the role that Alaska plays in global air traffic. This puts us in a much heavier role in trans-Pacific container trade, and we'll see how that works. Construction, manufacturing, telecom, I think those are really to be determined. But as far as telecom is concerned, there will be a fiber optic line. The fiber optic line may be retained for deals with phone companies by the Alaska Railroad. We've got that sorted out in our master agreement with the railroad. Make sure that we get paid back for putting in the fiber, but they may well end up being the business partner with the local phone companies or internet service providers for that. Let's go to the next slide. The opportunities for businesses. Early on, very, very soon, we're going to need to be doing species surveys, cultural, historical, paleontological surveys. A number of times in the past when gas pipelines were considered here, local native corporations helped participate in that. There will be more land and property survey, geotechnical and design support. When we get to construction, there's contractor personnel camps, housing, materials, consumables, hauling supplies and waste. I'll even say medical and a number of things that relate to the whole construction operation. In post-construction, we'll certainly be doing environmental compliance monitoring, operating a mitigation plan on air, water quality, noise, and those kinds of issues. And then in terms of operation and maintenance, there will be train crews, yard train personnel to switch cars. So you could end up working for the railroad, running a locomotive and never leaving Tok if you didn't want to leave Tok, because they'll be switching around the yards there. Track signal communications bridge, maintenance personnel, railroad management, and crew, housing, food, and hauling. So those 4,200 jobs are going to go a lot of different directions. We have not designed a kind of a job training aspect at this stage of the project, but I expect that we will. There will be opportunities in construction as well as maintenance for a long time to come. Next slide. I just want to thank right now, we had very strong support from this project getting started from Governor Dunleavy. He continues to demonstrate his support, assisting on various fronts here in Alaska and in Washington, D.C. The Alaska State Legislature, all but one vote, passed SJR 11 signaling support for the issuance of the presidential permit, which President Trump announced Friday night that he would do. The Alaska congressional delegation has been very strong in supporting getting us, removing the environmental, or the permitting impediments. It's not an environmental permit, it's a foreign policy permit, and continues to work with the Trump administration. I was on a call today with Congressman Young where he said, you know, this is, in his career, this is probably the second biggest thing in Alaska besides the Trans-Alaska. My daughter's just calling in to me, and she doesn't realize I'm on a call with 40 people. So I'm gonna have to call you back, sweetheart.
Okay.
But at any rate, where we are on that, the slide is missing there. Oh, there it is. Let's go to the next slide for a second. We've also gotten very nice letters of support from Tanacross Corporation, from Tetlin Native Corporation, from the Fairbanks Economic Development Council. And after the legislature dealt with this issue of SJR 11, the Pacific Northwest Economic Region, which is legislators from all over the Pacific Northwest and Western Canada, sent a letter to the White House expressing support for the project, and Lieutenant Governor Kevin Meyer and I have spoken to Penwar now twice, and a number of legislators have headed that direction as well. Next slide, please. Here, what we're going to talk about is our next steps. We have worked on Indigenous and community engagement. We're beginning to gather available information and public engagement and compile DNR 460 desktop studies. Let me explain what 460 desktop studies are. The Alaska legislature early in this century, about 2004 or so, passed a law that said when state land is needed for a rail extension to Canada, that the Alaska Railroad can ask for it, and DNR has to basically put it into the project. That doesn't mean we ignore public viewpoint on this. We try to come up with the best route that works for the public and works with the environment. But what we're trying to do is settle the state lands that would be part of this right of way early enough before we have to go to federal approval. So we're at the point now where we're very close to having a project description to give to the Department of Natural Resources. But we still want to work out some of these land issues with people in the community, with property owners, as we do that. So that's one of the purposes of this community meeting tonight. Next slide. DNR will take its, there's no time limit on DNR's approval, but we want to get the process started with them, because the next thing we want to do is we want to begin the National Environmental Policy Act process, which is an environmental impact statement. And that'll hold another hearings, additional hearings in Tok and other places along the route. We will draft an EIS with a third-party consultant. The agency will hold public meetings on that EIS and make sure that all of the issues that should be in the EIS are in it. Then there may be modifications, and there'll be a final EIS, after which basically the permitting decisions could be done. And many of the permitting decisions are things like stream crossings, wetlands permits, ability to mine gravel, for example, that might be needed, certain kinds of permits on the tunnel, and certain kinds of mitigation that we would probably talk about throughout on noise mitigation or protecting wildlife and that sort of those kinds of issues. So we expect to see that start sometime early next year, sometime in the first quarter. And we're hoping to be far enough along with the DNR process before we begin that. Because basically our attitude is that Alaskans can make many of these core decisions themselves, and then if we do it right environmentally, take it to the federal government for approval. Next slide. We obtained a commitment from the president last Friday. He tweeted that he was going to support the border crossing permit. And let me explain once again, that permit is something that has been a big risk factor in many other cross-border infrastructure projects. Sometimes it's taken many, many years to get a permit. And Governor Dunleavy had asked the president, listen, it's going to be very hard to get anybody to spend the kind of money to do the work with communities and all of those things if they have that big question mark out there as to whether or not the president will let them go across the border. And so we're very glad that the president took the advice of the governor, of Congressman Young, of Senator Sullivan, who pushed very, very hard to get this commitment from the president. We want to work with landowners. We have very early discussions going on right now with the Native Corporation landowners. And if you're a member, a shareholder, or a member of any of these tribes, you may have already heard some of this, and Joy is working on those issues, and we're about to try to put specific proposals on the table. In Alberta, we're working to get a financial model with the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation so that they can be investors in the project, and Alaska Native entities here. We've offered an opportunity to invest here. Some may do it, some may not, but we want to make sure that that's clearly understood before anybody says no for certain. We mentioned that we're going to work on the 460 application with DNR. We've begun preliminary discussions with the Surface Transportation Board, and I think they'll be big in the federal permitting on this, as will be the Corps of Engineers. and we will continue stakeholder engagements, including work with Alaska's ports. And we have a relationship with Valdez, with Port of Alaska at Anchorage, with Matsu port. And I expect that this will affect ultimately ports of Skagway, Haines, Port of Fairbanks headed up toward the Arctic, and even Whittier and Seward. So we continue to discuss ports as part of marketing the entire project. Let's go to the next slide. I just want to say thank you for listening to us tonight. We're very happy to answer questions. I have 45 minutes before I need to be on another call. I apologize. So if I have to leave before all questions are answered, I know that Don and Joy and Soli and Lindsay will make sure that we get your questions answered. But thank you very much for being part of this discussion tonight. And I'm really sorry I'm not there in Tok tonight. I'd much rather be there than stuck on the East Coast, but we had to come to the East Coast to get this crucial permit through and to see it through. So we're happy to be with you tonight virtually. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mead, and great job out in DC making sure that that we finally got our presidential permit. I know you were very instrumental in that decision happening. So great job to the team we have out there and to you for going out and helping to seal that deal for everybody. As we shift now over to kind of questions and discussion, we do have a question in the Q&A box. And of course, again, folks on the phone can press *9 to raise their hand, and we'll get you in line to speak and to ask questions. And then everyone else that's participating online with their computer, just use the raise hand function on your screen. And I'll go ahead and ask this first question from the Q&A box. Again, it's from Marty. And the question is regarding energy generation here in Tok. So the question is, does Tok have the generation capacity to supply the needs of the A2A facilities? It is not connected to the Fairbanks Delta power grid at this time. Is there a plan to make a connection?
Thanks for that question, because that lets me know what another challenge we'll have on the project. I know that some of the signal systems will be run with solar. We've got to look at the power grid and see what's available, as well as, again, we've got a nice long lineal alignment. If we need to run power along that alignment, we can do that as well. So those are all parts of the engineering considerations that we have to make as we go forward. And I love questions like that because it lets me know that there's some additional challenges to look at.
Thank you, Don, for answering that question. And I do not see any hands raised at this time from our attendees, virtual or on the phone. And so I'm going to ask Mr. Sean. I know we have several people at Fast Eddies that haven't been able to ask a question yet. And so I think Marty I see that your hand is raised, Marty. I'm going to go turn it over to Sean next door at Fast Eddies to let them have a chance to ask some questions, and then I'll come back to you. So just leave your hand raised and I'll come back to you. I wanted to open it up for our folks that are in person at Fast Eddies. So handing it over to you, Sean. Sean, if you guys are speaking, we cannot hear you at this time, and it looks like your line is muted. They might have got tired of waiting for their chance to say something, and they might have just kidding. I see you, Sean.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you great.
Apologies, I had my computer muted. So yes, we certainly do have questions here at Fast Eddy. So I think the easiest way to go about this, and for folks that are on the phone, please do hang with me as there will be a delay. But folks here at Fast Eddies, raise your hand and I will bring you the phone. You can ask your question, and then I will have to bring the phone, I think, back here so that the responder can adequately, give the answer, and everyone here in the room can hear. Apologies again for the technical issues that we're having, but this is going to be, I think, the most effective way, unless folks want to stand in aligned here, but that I think would get pretty challenging. So if folks would like to start raising their hands, I would be happy to start bringing the phone around. Do we have any? Okay. Would you mind stating your name and just the community that you're from?
I'm George Pine. I live here in Toke. My question is, how many acres would a sorting yard require for this operation?
It's a great question. Don, I'll hand that over to you.
I know that facility that we're looking at, and I haven't worked the acreage out, especially off the top of my head, but is when you're looking at 5 or 6 miles long, we're talking 300 or 400 feet wide. So that gives you kind of the length and the breadth of the facility. The small yards that we might have might be, 300 feet wide by 2,000 feet long, just enough to set out a few cars for drop off and pick up. If we end up with a larger yard, that may end up being 3 miles long or so. Again, that 400, 500 foot width to fit in the number of tracks and the other facilities. So my best is to say, here's the size, because it's not square. It fits linearly along the alignment. And I think that's an easier way to picture it, is length and width to get an idea of how large a facility might be. Typically when I start talking about acres, people start thinking square, and we're definitely not going to be very square. It'll be more of a long rectangle along the tracks. Hopefully that helps you picture what we might be talking about for some of the facilities in this area.
Hey, Don, if I could just add to this, we've talked about really 3 kinds of potential facilities. We've got a pretty good idea that we're going to have the customs linear facility that Don talked about. We know for sure we're going to have some way to get cars on and off the railroad that would be transferring goods to intermodal traffic, to deliveries to Toke, things to get on the Richardson Highway, for example. The third question is, if we get into the kind of major containerized cargo that might be headed from, say, Tokyo to Chicago, all that stuff comes off a ship, but there's not a great area in Anchorage to do that kind of sorting. And so the idea would be to put it on a unit train and send it to some place where we could do the sorting. And, as you get into Canada, there's room in Alaska. I'd like to try to keep the jobs in Alaska. We may have some free trade area arguments to make. And I just can't tell you what the size of that market is going to be as yet. But if you have land that you're interested in us considering, or something along those lines, or land that you're interested in seeing us not consider, please let us know.
Thank you, Mead. I think that adequately answered the question I got a head nod from the gentleman here. Is there any other questions here at the Fast Eddies from the group? All right, I got one way in the back, so give me a second. I'm going to run back there. Just so everyone on the phone call can hear too. Thank you.
Okay. Toke is not a municipality at this time. We know that the population would be affected a great deal if this happens right here in town, which it looks like it's likely to do. Would we be forced to become a municipality? How much population would we be looking at for permanent population here in town? And would be, let's see, how many permanent jobs would be here in town as well?
Thank you so much. That's a great question. Just give me a second. I'm going to run the phone back up to the microphone so everyone here in the room can hear.
So the question
All
is,
right.
Would this project be big enough to force Toke to become a municipality? That's totally up to you. When I was lieutenant governor, I often got phone calls from constituents who were were happy with or not happy with whatever the local boundary commission was working on. I think in our case, we want to be able to work with whatever community form of governance that you have in order. You know, I go back and look at the Alaska Railroad's relationship with Talkeetna, and it was rocky for a while. And without Talkeetna becoming a municipality, their mayor was a cat. Their informal mayor was a cat. They were able to work out what was the best way to site the depot for tourists and that sort of thing. So however it works to have a good planning process with us, we'll work with you. And if you decide that that you need a stronger local government for, you know, to cover costs of certain things or collect property taxes or that sort of thing, that's up to you. As far as the number of jobs in town, again, of the let's just talk about the kinds of jobs while we went through it, because we don't have a breakdown specifically for Tok at this time, and it's one of the things I think we'll be doing some economic studies on as part of the EIS. But you know, Tok is probably the first major stop in Alaska where you would talk about changing crews. So you might have a crew rotation facility, and you might have crews that that want to raise their families in Tok. There certainly will be lots of maintenance. There will be additional customs employees. You know, right now you've got customs employees who are based in Tok who work the Taylor Highway or go down the Northway. And, you know, we expect there'll be additional customs employees working year round. You've got, besides the maintenance and so forth, there may be additional opportunities for trucking companies and so forth. So it's pretty hard to predict exactly what it is, but we can tell you probably by the time we get to the EIS process, about how many crew members we're going to need, you know, changing out and that sort of thing. And we'll have a better job. But the overall estimate of 4,200 jobs in Alaska, I see a nice percentage of them happening south of Delta in the area leading up to the border.
Sean, do you have any more questions at Fast Eddies? Because we have several in the Q&A box, and we have a hand raised as well.
This is Mike Kronk here in Tok, and myself and Doug Pine have a similar question. What are the plans to make sure access is provided for locals to have access to their hunting and trapping areas, as well as their natural resources? We have lots of timber sales in this area, and how is that going to be protected from being overrun by people coming from the outside?
It's a great question. Thank you for asking it. I'm just making my way up to the mic here. All right, we're all set in here. Mead, would you like to go ahead and answer that question, or Don?
So let me just say, you know, as far as timber sales and you know, hunting and fishing, I think that we will be trying to map those areas to talk about them better in the environmental impact statement process, and then working with you to say, okay, how do we mitigate so that you don't have the area overrun? And just as an example, you know, there's a rail is a lot easier to contain access than a road, for example. So as we open up access in the Ladue River Valley with rail, it doesn't mean we've necessarily opened it up with a road. That's a planning process that the community can work on with the state, whether it wants it or not, you know, on that issue. If it's areas, say, between Tok and the Tanana River that you use for hunting and fishing, as Don mentioned earlier in this presentation, we'd certainly be working on ways to maintain access. And I've driven some of those roads back to the river that keep on going. And, you know, we know that that's important to people. They were very obviously being used. They're owned by the local corporation in some cases. And, you know, so that's something to work out there. But our goal is to not affect subsistence or normal sport hunting. As far as the extra people that would be employed in town, Again, that's something that as we work at impacts and look at it, it may be that there's ways to help plan that as well. So we see this as a large project for the impact on Alaska. We see it as an economic opportunity for Tok, but we certainly see an opportunity to by starting to talk now early to figure out what problems we want to try to avoid, and let's avoid them. I hope I answered the question directly. We don't have in terms of access to your hunting grounds, traditional trails and four-wheeler trails and roads. We certainly have to work on that with grade crossings and various safety procedures. When it comes to restricting access, where we open up new territory like we do in the Ladue, I think there's very good ways to handle that as part of a mitigation procedure. I mean, just up the road at the Pogo mine, for example, I can't tell you how many people told me I should try to sneak on the mine to get down the river. And the mine road had a mitigation requirement that they were not going to open up the mine road to general use, for example. And there's ways to do that with the railroad too.
All right, thank you, Mead. That did answer the question. We got a nod there. I'm going to go over and hand off the phone to James Squire, a gentleman from the Dry Creek community. He's got a question for us, maybe sorry. Area.
Hi, my name is James Squires. I'm a landowner in the area down by the original Alaska Highway on the other side of the Johnson from Tok. Your meeting in Delta was during hunting season, so I made the drive here to Tok and enjoyed some of the great pizza here at Fast Eddy's. But I'd like to reiterate some of the concerns that were brought up by Marty Laudert earlier, because the road, as Don McKinnon pointed out, earlier I heard him mention that he wanted an area with the best fit and that he wanted to avoid platted subdivisions and maintain access. And currently the way that he mentioned it's routed on the southwest side of the highway, not only is it cutting the original Alaska Highway in two places, which is in the National Register of Historic Places, that road, the original Alaska Highway, and there is also used for access to Craig Lake, which is a recreational area. It's stocked by Fish and Game and has been since the 60s. And there's also hunting in there, and there's trapping. I know at least one trap line that's in there. So that's used frequently for traditional purposes. There's also private land in there. I live in there year round and maintain and plow the road for access to the Alaska Highway. And there are two other folks living in there now currently, but there is a current subdivision. And recently the state of Alaska redid their Tanana Basin plan and opened up an additional 6,000 acres of settlement land in there on that side of the highway. So when you talk about best fit, I would be certainly interested in talking with Don McKimmon on the side to talk about some of the particulars in that area, and that aligning on the northeast side of the highway might be a much better fit that keeps access open and might even be a better grade as well, because that's a glacial moraine, very, very lumpy, and you'd have to move a lot of dirt besides cutting the highway. So I would sure be interested in sharing some of my information, outside this meeting. Thank you.
Mr. Squires, make sure that...
Mead, 1 second. Mead, let me get this over to the microphone, please. Thank you. Okay, we're all set now.
All I can say is that stretch of the highway coming down to the Johnson River was so pretty. I was about to make a postcard of it. I took a whole bunch of pictures last time I was there, and Don will make sure that Soli gets Mr. Squire's name and the others, and we'll be talking about that. Thank you very much for your comments. And for each of you who are property owners or have land adjacent to the railroad, our goal is to spend some time with you, sit down, and there may be some property owners who are interested in selling. Some property owners are saying, this would help add value to my property. I happen to own land right next to the Alaska Railroad, and I actually lease land from the Alaska Railroad as part of my home site, and we like it, but some people may not exactly want the change, and we're not sure we can accommodate everybody, but we can certainly talk. And it's much better that we talk amongst ourselves than be up there to begin with in front of a big government hearing.
Thank you, Mead. I have grabbed James's contact information and have made commitments that we would follow up with him and get feedback from the community and make sure that we're connecting with him and the engineers. I know that there's more questions. I've got a gal here looking at me, so I'll bring this on down. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Sue Stancliffe, just a quick question. Although this project is a ways off, I'm concerned about the funding. Perhaps you can tell me how this is going to be financed. Obviously, you've got ways to go in developing your finance package, but and I know there'll be Homeland Security and federal funds and such, but I wanted to ask if there's what the financing plan is and if any state funds are going to be required, because with the situation we're in, that's problematic, as you well know. I'll hand the phone back to Soli, but he's in the middle of a conversation here. Thank you.
Well,
all right, bringing this back to the microphone, Mead, just 1 second. Thank you. All right, we're good to go. Thank you.
Yeah, is it Sue Stancliffe?
Yes, it is. Yep, it is.
Yeah. I don't know if you had a relative who worked in the legislature named Stancliffe from the area, but anyway, it's nice to meet you. I'm not sure I've met you before. So
she does. You're right.
Yeah. Well, cool. Hope everybody's well. The first thing I want to say is your question is identical to a question that was asked by the legislature, it was asked by the governor, and was asked by the president of the United States. So the answer that we've given in all cases is this. This is a railroad that we expect to be privately funded. And I think I should say it's going to be funded really in 3 different baskets. The first kind of funding is the money that Sean McCoshen has spent himself now out of his own family office, where he spent over $100 million to try to narrow down the engineering, to work on First Nation relationships in Canada, to make the project a reality enough that institutional low-risk investors could come in. The second phase, now that we have the presidential permit, is to go through what will be probably a couple of $100 million more, which will be some institutional capital that is maybe higher risk, and Mr. McCoshen himself. It's possible that some of the First Nations investment in the project in Canada may have a government backstop to it, in that they have a program for that that's trying. They did not do a land claim settlement situation and venture capital that we did here in the Native Land Claims Act of 1971. So they have a way to help encourage First Nations in Canada to become investors in infrastructure projects. So that's kind of phase 2. And then phase 3 is that we would have lined up enough customers, and we would lined up enough of a relationship with the ports, and we'd understand the economics, and we would have the permits, the point where we'd be going out to the market and saying, okay, of the $16 billion, maybe there's $3 billion or $4 billion that's needed in terms of risk equity, and another $12 billion that could come out of debt. And without naming any names of people who've said that they would want to be part of that, I can tell you that there are sovereign wealth funds like the Alberta Investment Board, the Alaska Permanent Fund, there's sovereign wealth funds all over the country. In fact, close to 80 of them met in Juneau last year and had a presentation on this project. There's also large insurance companies. There's large private equity funds. General David Petraeus, a name you might have heard of, heard the presentation on A2A. I just traded notes with him this week, as a matter of fact, and I work with him at the Wilson Center, on a public policy basis. So I think the point I'm getting at here is that we're now still in bucket number 1, where it's all coming out of a single investor's pocket. Bucket number 2, we want to try to bring in investors who've got the capability to get through a couple $100 million worth of permitting, and this is really no different than some of the mines down the road. And then if we do our job right, bucket number 3 is going to come from pensions, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds that are very interested in not losing their capital, but getting a good, solid infrastructure type return over time. We are not looking for state funds. I will say that, you know, when you borrow or you work with somebody like Ada or the Alaska Railroad bonding capability, the project still has to pencil out and pay it back, but we're not looking at this point for any federal or state funds to build track at this point whatsoever.
All right, Mead, thank you for that. That adequately answered it. We got a good nod
I could have
there.
had a short answer and just said no, but I wanted you to know how we're trying to do it.
Okay. All right, do we have any other questions for the group one there? All right, give me 1 second. I'm going to walk to the back.
Hi, my name is Anton. I'm from Delta. I have a question. Alberta sold its oil fields to China. How is that going to affect us here, being the customs point in Tok? It gives them 95 miles to get from Alberta to here. How would that work, and how would that affect us here?
Sure. So
Great question, Anton. 1 second, Mead. I'm getting back to the mic. Thanks.
Okay.
All right, we're good to go.
You know, Anton, I got a question out of Delta about China. I talked to the questioner again today. Yeah, if you think about Alaska's trade position, okay, Alaska's trade position, China is our largest trading partner. We sell most of our fish, most of our aviation services and so forth to China because they're just such a large population. Japan is number 2, Korea is number 3. If this oil is sold to China, it's not going to be carried on our private railroad unless they pay the bill. Okay, customs is going to let it through. They certainly let our fish through. They let our timber that gets sold to China through, and you know that'll be done that way. Now another question that was asked is are you depending on Chinese finance? And I think the answer to the question is that when I take a look at markets, say for bitumen right now that are growing in Asia, one of the fastest growing markets for this is actually India. And there's Indian investment companies that we have on our list to talk to. So it may be very different. And India may even have a population larger than China fairly soon. So I can't tell you exactly who's going to be buying the products that'll be going back and forth. You may see one container car that'll be iPhones made in China, and the next one may be telephones made in Japan, or shirts made in Sri Lanka or Vietnam. But that's what world trade is all about. And when we're shipping things like furniture and, fuel, grains, and potash and sulfur west, that may be going to 10 different countries in Asia. So we're going to be very, very careful about investment from foreign countries, and any major investment on a project like this has to be reviewed by a group at the Treasury Department called CFIUS. And as far as customs requirements, most goods that get on the railroad will be in bond, and customs will have the whole manifest before, 3 days before it ever gets here. And they're probably not going to have to pull a car off the train unless there's something really screwy. So I hope I answered your question. It is true that a very large part, more than 10% of our economy is based on trade with Asia right now. And this may increase the trade with Asia, but it's going to grow the economy at the same time.
Okay, thank you, Mead. I think that answers the question. We've got another question in the back, so I will walk this. 1 second. Thanks for your patience, everybody. All right.
Hi, this is Dale Brooks again. At the expense of sounding like a damn hippie, we're concerned about our permafrost up here in Alaska. We know that it can be quite severely affected by any kind of construction. I don't know much about railroad construction at all, but I'm assuming that it's going to be quite a large swath of area cut all across our wilderness here that probably has never been touched before. Wondering what the long-term impacts will be of the overall environmental changes that will make, and what kind of upkeep is going to be maintained with where the road crossings are, who's going to be responsible for paying for those ongoing damages from the permafrost being affected, and also the railroad itself, because of the permafrost, is probably going to require a lot of maintenance. Just wondering where the responsibility financially will fall for those items.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Don,
much.
can you handle?
Great question.
Yeah.
Mead, 1 second. I've got to get back to the microphone. Sorry.
Okay.
We're in the dark ages here due to my technical problems. All right, we're back at the microphone, Mead. Please carry away.
Well, I was gonna say to your question, there's quite a bit of discussion about permafrost. We've already outlined some studies on permafrost just to make sure that we've got that. And I'm going to ask Don to address that question in a minute. But I'll also say this. If you live in Tok, you're used to very, very low temperatures. And this is a railroad that we've got to build for extreme cold, as well as make sure that we protect the environment that we're doing. One of the main things that we're going to be doing is with each stream crossing, with maintaining wetlands and so forth, I believe that this railroad will, compared to, say, railroads built 150 years ago, pay much, much more attention to the hydrology so that we're not affecting water quality. They're still trying to fix the Everglades in Florida from roads that were built 100 years ago. So I think we've learned a whole lot of lessons generally in this, and I'm going to have Don address the permafrost issues. But I'll just tell you, there's probably about 10 different operating issues that have to deal with the extreme cold that we're going to be dealing with also, that are pretty important. They're going to be very interesting as we go along.
So there are several different questions that you asked. The permafrost issue, we're working through already identifying the areas along the route, which is a lot. And then we're looking at the best practices for mitigation on that to protect the permafrost for construction, how to insulate it. Some of those best practices come from the Himalayas. I mean, they're Russia. So that's where a lot of the research, and a lot of the research is actually done University of Alaska Fairbanks, and pulling in information from the other countries that have the same issues. So we're using those, and the products that are available now with things like, they call it GeoGrid and GeoWeb and various type of things. If you think of when the Alaska Highway got built, they basically cut down trees and laid the road on the trees. There's a lot better products now than doing that. And so those things will get looked at. We're a little bit too early to give you definitive answers of what's going to be done. As far as this wide swath in the forest, our plan is to only take what's absolutely necessary to construct the railroad. And that's from toe of cut to toe of fill to toe of fill, top of cut, period. And then revegetate as we need to. We can't leave things open. The days of old where they just built a big scar and then walked away from it and hope it healed is no, we've got to actually take care of that and put in the erosion control and sediment controls that are necessary to protect the environment. Concerning the actual maintenance of the railroad, that's the operating side. Those costs are built into the rates that are billed to the customers that ship on. And the goal is to have a return on investment. So those are all things that need to be looked at. That includes what we call the surfacing, the leveling of the track, the reballasting, if you will, that needs to go on if there are things like settlements and that. Again, from a safety standpoint, we have to avoid all those. If we delay trains, the investors lose money because we can't make the money. If we have a derailment, we definitely delay the trains. So the maintenance of the railroad is very critical to maintain a safe railroad. And those are all practices that we'll be working on. And if you will, that's what the Alaska Railroad's doing as well. And then one of their big concerns when you raise the permafrost is that permafrost is moving north. And that's a big issue on the Alaska Railroad. So those are things that we'll be working through and developing the engineering solutions, both to mitigate and minimize the damage, if you will. And I don't like using that word, but the impact that the project has in the environmental area, as well as what we have to do for design to protect the permafrost and maintain the railroad. If we protect the permafrost, the railroad stays longer and it's less maintenance. The roads and road crossings, those get worked out with the owners of the road and the land. So each one of those would be an individual case, and until we actually see what they are, what the use is, we may put an undercrossing in for access, so you've got year-round access under the railroad. It may require an overcrossing. We've got mitigation to do for the animals and natural wildlife to cross the railroad, which also provides additional crossings over or under the track. So there's quite a bit of work left to do, and we're just at the very early stages. That's not going to fully answer your question, but maybe it gives you an approach that we intend to use and incorporate in and as we develop this project. And if there's a specific thing or specific item that you're concerned about, let Solly know what it is, and then we can talk with you individually and identify what that is and talk through some of the details on it. So hopefully that helps a little bit. It may not fully allay your concerns, but I think we have a good approach that will address those issues raised. We have to address them. The NEPA process will not allow us to sweep them underneath the rug. They'll be up in forefront, and we need to do that. And for the maintenance and safe operations of the railroad and the profitability of the railroad, they have to be addressed, or the investors won't invest in the railroad.
Thank you very much, Don. I'm getting a nod in the back, and I know from just experience on this project that was a great answer. So thank you for that, Don. But if there are any other questions specifically to that, I'm happy to write those down before we take off on this evening. But that does not mean that this is over. There's still opportunity for other folks to ask questions. So with that said, do we have any in the room that would like to voice a concern? All right, we got one in the back. Give me a second, and you're right there.
Solly, we're trying to get you your exercise today.
Hi, this is Terry Cross from Coke. Years ago, I lived in the Totem Park area of Fairbanks, which is near college. In the wintertime, the noise from the Alaska Rail Yard was so loud that it sounded like the trains were coming right down the street. Has any thought been put towards moving such facilities further out of town or putting up some sort of sound mitigation?
All right, just running this up to the front, Don and Mead.
Don, why don't you start with that, and I'll finish.
So the noise.
Don, can you guys go ahead and restart there? I wasn't quite up to the computer yet. Thanks.
Yeah, we were just starting, Solly, so you're good.
Okay.
And the noise, there will be a noise study conducted as part of the overall NEPA process. And we will look at putting either natural barriers, if you will, noise barriers, trees, like those type of things to absorb the sound. If there's better locations than others that are more acceptable from a sound standpoint, we need to look at that. There's a balance that needs to be struck that as we work with the people in the area, we need to figure that out. So I do think we'll take that into account. The same question was asked at Delta Junction at their meeting. Noise is a large concern. I know what yards are like. When I first started my railroad career, I lived right next to the yard in an old railroad house. So we fully understand what noise is like at night. So we'll work through that with you. We don't have an answer right now, but there are different ways and methods like the tree belts and things like that that we can put in to mitigate the noise. And modern operations, especially, Anchor or Fairbanks is a major yard with a lot of switching going on, a lot of customers. At this point in time, I don't think we have that major of a facility envisioned for Tok, unless it's decided that we do want to put this major sorting facility there. But we'd have to find a spot to put it, excuse me, and figure, and the noise definitely gets considered when that's part of the placement, the decision making. So those issues will be taken care of. Again, I don't have a definitive answer, but knowing that there's concerns like that, we will look, they do get looked at. It's a requirement of the NEPA process. And then we'll take a look as we place things, what the mitigation factors is, and try to work out something. I prefer natural for sound attenuation as opposed to building a big wall. But we need to look at those things.
And the only thing I want to add to that, this is Mead, is that our owner, Sean McCoshin, has asked us to look very carefully at new hydrogen propulsion so that there's less diesel smoke or no diesel smoke if we can avoid it. We are also, when you get electric trains, they can sometimes be less noisy than a diesel engine, powering a train. One of the things that with unit trains and actually building the track the right way is you get less kind of accordion type activity on the train itself. Don spoke about that early on. So there's a number of different noise mitigation measures that we're considering and will be part of the engineering and the environmental studies. But thank you for raising the question. We don't want to try to ignore it or hide it. It's real. I live right next to the Alaska Railroad, and they run gravel trains all night in the summer. And as neighbors, we were able to get slow orders in a certain area so that our house didn't shake like summer. Like the washing machine was on spin cycle. Again, the value that we have of a new build here, where we're looking at the geotechnical, some of those questions came up in terms of how does that affect water quality, will definitely be studied and looked at. Ladies and gentlemen, I unfortunately have to leave because I've got a standing commitment with another call at this time. But I want to thank you for coming out tonight, and I know that Soli and Joy and Don can handle any remaining questions you have. And I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be in Tok virtually, and I can't wait to be back in Tok, not virtually, and that will happen sometime soon.
Thank you so much, Mead. Take care and safe travels back home.
Okay, thank you, Joy. Thanks, Don. Thanks, Soli.
Take care,
thanks,
Mead.
everybody. You bet.
Sean, do we still have questions next door at Fast Eddy's?
Yes, we do. I've got one here right at the end of the table. We're running the phone over right now.
Great job keeping up with it, Sean. I'm glad everybody's
Right
still
there.
here with us.
Hi, this is Pam Good from Deltana. This has to do with property tax on the railroad. Currently, the pipeline, the Alaska pipeline, the state imposes a 20 mil rate on the pipeline. And unorganized Alaska, 100% of that property tax goes to the state for all Alaskans. But some of the municipalities on that pipeline has figured out how to max tax themselves so that they receive a large amount of that money for just themselves, like the North Slope, $377 million just in last year, and down in Valdez, I think approximately $38 million. That's an awful lot of money for just those small areas where unorganized borough gives 100%. So will there be, and of course it looks like most of the railroad is going through unorganized Alaska, will there be a state imposed property tax on the railroad?
That is a great question. Don, in your experience with past railroad projects, do you have any knowledge on this? would have liked for me to be on the phone call to answer this yet, but Don, if you wouldn't mind taking a stab at this, that would be really helpful. From my understanding is that is yet to still be determined, but Don, I'll let you, if you don't mind, take a crack at it and share some of your knowledge.
I know the railroads down here in the lower 48 do pay property taxes and taxes on investments on the equipment and facilities they have. I know that with the DNR 460 process and the ability of the Alaska Railroad to work through the area, I think that may, it's not clear what the tax situation, at least to me anyway, and I'm definitely not an expert on Alaska taxes. I'm much better on the engineering side than taxes. So I think that's a question that we will note, get back with you on an answer on that, because it's not the first time it's been asked. And we should be able to do that, because that's also got to be built into our operating costs as well. And so we're going to have to get that answered out here in the future, and probably in the near future as investors start looking at the project more seriously. So I thank you for the question. And I wish I had a better answer for you, but I do know that they do pay taxes down here. It's not a small amount, but how the tax laws work up in Alaska and how this project would work with the Alaska Railroad and the DNR 460 law that was passed, that makes it difficult to give you a good answer up there, at least for me. Sorry.
No, Don, I appreciate that. You obviously have a little bit more information and knowledge on railroad taxes than I do. I do know that our discussions with the Department of Revenue have not gotten to that point yet, but I would love to follow back with you and, in adequate time and get you some responses to that as we learn more. With that said, I know there was another hand when I was in the back there that was raised. Do we still have another question? Am I not seeing someone around the corner? Okay. 1 second, guys. I'm running the phone over.
Thank you, Sean. And just checking in, we have about a half an hour left in the time that we had allocated for the meeting. And I just want to do a quick check-in that we still have a hand raised on the line with a virtual participant. And we also have 9 questions in the Q&A box. I think some of them probably would have been directed towards Meade. So we'll do our best to get those questions on the record and to answer the ones that we can. But I just wanted to check in and let you know we still had a few questions here online as well.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and walk the phone back to this lady and let her answer a question, and then maybe we'll turn it to you so you can let those folks on the line ask their questions. So give me just a second, Joy, to get the phone back over there.
Sounds good, Sean. Thank you.
Mine's quite simple. This is Jill Urina. I'm in Tok. I am curious. I've been to your website, and I'm curious if the map is going to improve. The only one that I saw on the website is just a general map, not zoomable, not really interactive. Are you going to have a better map so that we can actually look at these photos closer up and be able to see exactly where they are going to be running?
1 second, running the phone back up to the PA system. All right, we're good to go now. All right, so Don, if you wouldn't mind taking a stab at that, that would be really helpful. I know that we have talked about adding more maps and interactive graphics and things like that to the website at a later date, but at this current time, this still is a preliminary alignment. And as a result, we have not uploaded detailed maps and with interactive, modules and things like that. But Don, I know that we have discussed, doing such in the coming months. There may be some info that you can provide on that.
Yeah, actually, Sully, that's about the best answer I have for now. I would indicate that if the person has a specific area of interest, that she give her name to you, and we'd work with you directly to look at those areas. That would be an interim solution until we actually get actual maps on there and work through the alignment better. And I do want to put, this alignment's not finalized. We've addressed a corridor right now, but as you saw at Delta Junction, that corridor is being shifted as we get more input. And then tonight's feedback on the Alaska Highway is going to cause some shifts as we look at things. And so as we work with you, we know that's going to be done. In the NEPA process, there are alternative alignments that get developed as well. So there will be additional shifts or alignments that need to get looked at. So as we talk with each other and work with each other and let each of us know what your issues are, and as we can work with you, we can refine that map and try to find the best location that answers the environmental issues as well as your issues, and we work together to do that. I don't have an answer specifically on when could a map be up online, but that is your questions noted, and then we'll have to work with the A2A management and work through a schedule.
Thank you, Dawn. Much appreciated for that. And I will follow up with her and get her contact information, and we can, narrow down the specific spot along the route and provide some feedback on that. With that said, the group has dwindled down a bit, but I know that we've got one more question from Doug, so I'm going to run that over.
Yes, Doug Parker, Delta Junction. And I would just like to bring up something I brought up in Delta Junction at the previous meeting, that a list be established as soon as possible with all landowners that will be probably involved in this. I know the route is not exact right now, but the proposed routes, anybody that's involved in that should be on a list. And while this route is still in transition and being modified, that's when we should be able to have our input, not after the route is more or less finalized. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. That is a great question and a comment, and we have been working on that over the last couple of weeks. But as you can imagine, with the presidential permit coming to us last week, some of our time has shifted. But we are focusing on getting a list and figuring out a process that we can engage with all the property landowners along the route, and not only just the property landowners, but the folks that are going to be, have a home off the highway, and that their road's going to be crossed, or their hunting lands will be crossed, or something of that nature. And so I wish that I could give you a specific to what that process is going to look like, but we are working on it, and we have your contact information. We've exchanged voicemails, and we'll be in touch on that. Luckily, we have a great relationship with the city of Delta, and they've been very helpful in communicating aspects of the railroad. So when those details do become privy, and as we do start to work through more engaged engagements with the private landowners, the city of Delta will be one avenue that y'all can look to for information, as well as our website. And all this will be notified to you. Joy or Don, would you like to add anything to that, or should we move on to the next question?
I would just add that we appreciate everyone's patience as we respond to your questions and requests for different forms of maps and information. And I think this is definitely a process that's going to be more like a marathon and not a sprint. And we, again, your involvement along the way and giving us guidance on the answers and the information that you would like to see as timely as we can make that happen. We just really appreciate you joining us tonight and getting this conversation started. Really look forward to more communication as well. So I'll hand it back to you, Sean, and whenever you're ready, I'll read some of the questions from the Q&A box.
Joy, let's go ahead and answer a couple of those off the Q&A box so that those folks have their questions answered, and then I'll open it up again here to the TOC community for any of their concerns.
Okay, sounds great. Yeah, some of these folks might be ready to get offline. So I see that one person asked a little bit earlier about the vibration and the trains. It says trains cause a great deal of vibration on the ground. Are there any studies as to how this may affect the Toke Aquifer?
So this is Don. There will be. I know railroads cross over aquifers a lot of places around the world, and there's not been a problem caused by vibrations. Generally, when you get 100 feet away and 30, 40 feet underground, those vibrations are pretty attenuated. As you know, it's not like you're standing right next to the train where you're feeling that vibrations most. So that's going to be one of those things that gets studied and looked at. I mean, I live in a town that the aquifer is within 20 to 30 feet of the railroad tracks, and the railroad has not affected the aquifer. So those are, and we're in a gravel basin, probably very similar to what is in the Toke area. So it's going to be one of those things that we study. Have we looked at it yet? No. We're in the very early stages of the project. So there's a lot of stuff that we've got to do between now and then. And I like the analogy to a marathon, although I like the image of Sully sprinting tonight, but we are in a marathon and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. It's going to take some time. This project will be well thought out, and with your input, that will help it be well thought out.
Thank you very much, Don, for that answer. And we're going to have a rapid round of quick questions here because we have some pretty quick and easy ones. So we'll get the momentum going. So what is this expected speed of the train, Don?
Max speed is 60 miles an hour. That's the safety from the FRA, the Federal Railway Administration, sets that. Loads will probably move a little bit slower. The big heavy bulk trains, when they're loaded, might be 50 miles an hour. The empties would move at 60.
Okay, great. And is it electric or diesel powered locomotives?
Diesel powered locomotives, the cost of running electric with the infrastructure that's needed and the substations, the power generation would drive the cost up probably another 30 or 40% to actually build the railroad, and the operating costs would be more expensive. It may be something down the line as the electrical system is improved and built up, but the initial operations would be diesel electric locomotives.
Okay, great. And another quick question, is it 1 or 2 tracks? Also, did I hear it right that there will be a train of 96 cars every 2 hours? So that's from one person, one or 2 tracks, and then whether or not there'd be 96 cars every 2 hours. They thought they heard that earlier.
The railroad would be a single track railroad with the sidings located about every 15 miles or so. That needs to be confirmed with the operations study that we noted to be completed. And there might be in a few areas where we have really long sidings in mountainous areas where the trains might get congregated, like a traffic jam, if you will. And we need to avoid head-on train activity. So we'll be looking at that with a study, but the primary thing is single track with sidings every so often to allow for passing of trains. The maximum length of train that we're looking at, the bulk trains, would typically be the 96, 2 locomotives, 96 cars, 3 locomotives, 96 cars. So they're rather long trains. The maximum would be 10 trains a day or so, which when you're saying every 2 hours, that's pretty close. But they won't be like clockwork. So some might be a little bit closer together. There might be gaps between them. So, and that's a full build out. We won't start running 10 trains a day right off the bat. That will be built up into that over time. And that's why we've got to look very closely at the grade separated crossings, even the local roads and your gravel paths and your access. We need to look as much as we can at grade separating everything, because the more impatient you get waiting for a train, the more likely somebody's going to try to go around or over and try to beat the train. And that's the type of thing from a safety thing we need to prevent through proper design of the railroad.
Okay, great. Thank you, Don. And we have a few comments here that I will just read into the record. Again, the meeting is being recorded. And one of the comments is we also need to protect dog mushing trails that are south of Tok on the way to Valdez. So I wanted to read that aloud. And the other one is that we own property at Dry Creek and would like to be put on a list of landowners interested in receiving info as the route is developed. Thank you. So we got that read. And another question is, being a landowner that will be on or very near the right of way, will we have a chance to talk to someone in person about the proposed alignment? Is there a way we can get on an email list? So Sean, if you're comfortable on a few of these, I will share your email address. A few folks would like to see the slide presentation and specifically look a little bit closer at the route. So I'm going to go ahead and answer these questions here and type your email in, Sean, so people can stay connected.
Sounds great. Thank you, Joy. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. And I wanted to give Marty a chance to ask his question. He's been very patient over the last 45 minutes or hour. So Lindsay, if you would please go ahead and open Marty's line, please. And Marty, you will probably have to unmute yourself. She's opened your microphone, but once you unmute yourself, you'll be able to speak. And your line is now open. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I'd really like to thank you, Joy, Sean, Don, and Mead for the presentation tonight. It's been very informative. Some of my questions have been answered, or at least have been addressed. One question for Don. I know a lot of people are concerned about noise of rails at grade crossings with the trains blowing their whistles, and I'm assuming, having worked for the railroad many, many years ago, that any new construction is a continuous welded rail, which kind of takes away some of that click, clack that we used to hear on the rails. That kind of mitigates the noise somewhat. One track is going to alleviate some of the noise, but basically my two major questions. And then my one concern that I have is with fire. The track is going to go through some pretty remote areas, and I have witnessed personally trains starting fires in remote areas. Just want to know if that's being addressed and looked at. Basically, that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marty. Yes, the railroad will have welded rail. So those of you who grew up with the old clickety-clack will miss that nostalgic bit of railroading. Those of you who like quiet that's the problem with these tracks. You will not hear the train coming. It's that quiet, other than the locomotive as it goes by. So that's a good thing from a noise standpoint. Road crossings, the train blows its whistle to warn people that it's coming down the track. There are rules. If we need to put in quiet crossings, we can do that. We'll try to grade separate the crossings as much as we can to avoid the noise from the horns blowing, but understand that it is a safety item. So we'll have to work with you and figure out the best way to address those in the areas where it is a major concern. And then your fire guard question, I totally get fires. Having worked for railroad myself in an area where sometimes we've had 50,000 acres get started because of a maintenance crew in a grass area and get a grass fire going. So I get it. We'll have fire guards where we need to. Where we actually plow in the fire breaks alongside the tracks so that any soot from the locomotive or sparks from the brakes or whatever might be stopped before it gets into the forest. And then there'll be arresters on the locomotives themselves as well, so they don't have any soot blowing out that might cause fires. So yeah, it's a big concern. It will be maintenance that needs to be maintained, because if we have fire guards, we have to maintain them as well. So yes, those considerations will be included. And we definitely don't want to be responsible for causing anything that would damage the environment like a forest fire. That's major and we get it.
Great. Thank you for that question, Marty, and thank you for the answer, Don. One of the last questions here, or the last question in the Q&A box, is that we lost connection, so this may have been addressed, but is it possible to have a list published of landowners that are going to be affected by the path of the railroad if it is not adjusted in Delta? So that's a question just on, yeah, whether we'll be publishing all of the landowners, and I'm not sure how that works exactly. I know we'll be contacting landowners. Sean or Don, do you know if we plan to publish a list like that?
Well, Don, you know this far better than I do, but I am aware of the fact that there is a requirement to state impacted landowners, for a federal EIS process. Prior to that, posting it, hard to say. I would expect that would be something that we would do. I mean, contacting and reaching out to these folks, yes, certainly. But that's a question that we can get back to the group on. Don, is there a requirement from your understanding of that in the 460 process? I know that we must convey some, but to that level of detail, I don't remember seeing that when reviewing.
Typically, we would gather the list of names and and contact those people directly. From a privacy standpoint, however, some of those people may not like their names being broadcast in front of everybody. So it does go two ways. We would respect that privacy. People will be contacted. You'll get meeting notices. You'll get mailing. But I've not typically been involved where we publish a list of everybody involved where the project may cross their lands. And that's basically to respect the people's privacy of those who do not want to have their name published. So we tend to go that way and respect that. Again, that's an issue. We'll bring it out, but there is nothing that requires us to publish the list of property owners that we cross through the EIS process.
Thank you. That was my thought too, was that it would probably be a privacy issue. So Sean, we don't have any more questions in the Q&A box. And do you have any more pressing questions there?
Yes, we do. Give me just a second. I'll hand the phone on down the table.
Yeah, this is Doug Pine in Toke. I just wondered if you had a projected timeline for completion of this project.
It's a great question, Doug. And if you wouldn't mind, Don, taking it from there, as you've worked on developing many of these project Gantt charts. At a high level, I can say that the plan is to be operational towards the end of this decade. But there's many things to be worked out and along the process. But Don, you're the subject matter expert on that. I'll hand it off to you.
I hate to be called an expert, but the environmental process itself will take 2 to 3 years. And then as the design process will proceed in conjunction with the environmental process as well. Construction is a 3-year, 2, 3, possibly 4-year process. And so getting the project up and running by the end of the decade is probably a good outside number. I'm sure the investors would like to have it up and running so that they can get a return on their investment sooner than that. But it just takes time. Like I said, the NEPA process, 2 to 3 years. The construction itself, 3 years. If you can imagine one of these tunnels, that's 15 feet a day of activity from each end. So at best, you'll get 30 feet a day to maybe 40 of tunnel construction building. And so as you can look at some of these tunnels, that's a lot of days of work. And the environment in construction, we've got very constricted construction seasons up in Alaska as well. So that's what's driving that schedule on construction. So that's a rough number. We've worked out some Gantt charts. Yes, we've got some schedules. That's pretty much in line with all the schedules we've been working at. So hopefully that answers your question. We're too soon on the design features to really say definitive. It's going to take 299 days, but or whatever, or 999 days. But I think that gives you a range of things to shoot for as a response.
Great. Thank you, Don. Sean, do you have more questions there?
No worries. No, don't worry about it. I got a quick question. We see these tunnels, but there's no explanation. Why is there a need for the tunnels? Gotcha. I mean, it should be a quick answer.
Yeah. Remember that little graphic that I showed that had the 1%, 1.5% grade? If I were to go around that, we'd be lengthening the project another 20, 30 miles to handle the grades of the mountainous terrain in this area. And we've got areas in Canada that are worse, and the Thompson Pass area is one of the worst spots to try to get through. So that's why we have tunnels. It's literally, the grades are such that we need to go under the mountain. We can't go around it. It's not cost effective.
Okay, Don, that is a great answer. More information than you. So thank you so much. We're square on that. We've got another question from Mr. Squire, so I'm going to hand the phone to him. Thanks, Don.
Hi, this is James Squires again. Kind of a quick two-point question. If the train is required to blow its horn at a grade crossing, generally, how far can you hear that horn? I mean, how many miles are we talking about with that horn? And the second part of the question is the right-of-way that you're trying to go for this route, is that what's called a exclusive use right-of-way? Is that an EU right-of-way? And if the answer to that second question is yes, I have a quick follow-up.
The train horn noise will depend on the terrain. If you're up against a mountain, you'll hear it a lot farther distance than if you're out in the forest and the train's running through the trees. It definitely can be heard for a couple thousand feet because you're trying to give the warning to the people. And farther away, and it's hard to tell because it really depends on the area as far as the distance. I'm attuned to the train. I still get jumpy because I used to work on the railroad, and when you heard that horn, you better be in the clear. So I probably hear it better than some other people do. So it's hard to give you a definitive answer about how far, but it's really terrain dependent, and that's part of one of the answers in the noise study that'll get done. Because they will go through specific areas and paying attention to the characteristics of the rocks in the area, the mountains, the distance to the hills or canyons, and the trees and vegetation in the area, what might soak up sound, what might reverberate or echo the sound to give an idea of how much it would actually move. And you'll get in the sound study, you'll actually see the distance away from the tracks and the attenuation of the sound the farther away you get from the tracks. So you'll actually see that in those studies as part of the environmental process. As far as the exclusive right-of-way use, I know through the DNR 460 process, the land will be granted to the Alaska Railroad, but there will be crossings of the track that allowed, and that's, to me, that's not an exclusive use, that those crossings are in the agreements that will be made for them and give people access across the railroad. As far as parallel uses to the railroad, that's where the DNR 460 and granting the lands, at least the state lands to the railroad, would occur, and what gets used along parallel to the railroad track. Again, we have to be a certain distance away for safety. When it comes to crossing the private lands, that gets negotiated with each landowner. Eventually, with the DNR 460, so people know, and you can see this in the law, the final width is 200 feet, and we've got to make arrangements with within that with that 200 feet, because there we do have some fills and cuts that will extend outside, and they need to be maintained by the railroad. So those are things that need to be worked out as we work ahead. Does that help you? Not, I don't know. I mean, I can't give you a definitive answer on exclusive use because it's wrapped into that DNR 460 law and what the Alaska Railroad gets granted through that. So hopefully that at least helps provide some guidance.
Sean, I think you might be muted, or are you guys done with questions over there?
Well, now, okay. Sorry about that technical error. So I'm so sorry.
Okay. Yeah, the concern about the exclusive use easement is I know in South Anchorage there's a lawsuit that we're watching very closely where the railroad is suing for exclusive use of their for the right-of-way over federal homestead land. And I guess originally people that have federal homestead land own the rights under the railway if it were ever to be abandoned. But with exclusive use down the road, if that railway were ever to be abandoned, now the railroad still owns private property, a swath through these other people's land. So anyway, the point is that we're watching this lawsuit very closely because it may be establishing precedent for the rest of the state. So that's why I was wondering if you're going for an exclusive use right away or not. Thank you.
Thanks. And I was listening to the board meeting this last week where that was discussed, and that will be a topic to work with the between the A2A and their agreement that they have with Alaska Railroad. So yes, that will be addressed. And we'll, like I said, with the private landowners, that has to be worked through. And right now, I'm not aware of any homestead land that we're crossing, but that'll come out through the right-of-way process we've got working forward as well.
Thank you, Don, and thank you all for the questions. A quick check-in on time. It is currently 8:58, and our meeting was supposed to go until 9. I want to be mindful of everyone's time, and I'm very impressed that we still have so many people participating, both in person over at Fast Eddies and online. A few people have dropped off, but I just wanted to thank the folks that have stayed with us the whole time. And
Joy, we've got we do have another question here at Fast Eddies.
Okay, and yeah, one I wanted to point out one quick thing though. We if you look in the chat box, I did put Sean an email there, and so if there's additional questions or more follow-up, please reach out to Sean or myself. And I'll hand it back to you, Sean, for the question.
Okay, thank you, Joy.
Okay, this is Dale Brooks again from Toke. My question is in regards to the Ladue country, which is gold country. If they strike gold, who gets the mineral rights on that? Oh, they don't?
We got to mix that right away.
Okay, so I guess that's not an issue. But regardless of where you're at, regardless of where it goes, there is a possibility of minerals that may be discovered or possible native archaeological sites that were unknown, possibly even dinosaur bones, because this area is so untouched. Just wondering who gets the rights to those things when they do occur, and how is the railroad going to handle that?
Don, that is jogging my knowledge of the state's process for, coming up with on state artifacts and things of that nature. Do you have any advice that you can give on that?
Yeah, I'll start with the cultural, the paleontological discoveries. There is a set process. If those are found during construction and they were not known to begin with, and basically construction stops, the archaeologists are called in, or the paleontologists. They record, recover, and do whatever is needed, depending on what the artifact is. And then only after all that occurs, can construction continue. When it comes to the mineral rights, we know the subsurface rights have several different owners. There's mining rights out there as well, and claims. All that needs to be worked through, and through those agreements, those type of things will get addressed as we work through.
Thank you, Don. Did that answer the question?
Not exactly. I'm wondering if minerals get discovered that don't have claims on them, does the state of Alaska get the mineral rights, or does the railroad, or that?
So Don, there was a specific question regarding if through the construction process, if we come across a mineral deposit of considerable value, who retains rights to the subsurface interest? It's my understanding it the states, we're not going to get any subsurface rights for this railroad. Railroads are built on the surface of the land. Subsurface retained, title is retained by the state unless there's a mining claim in that area, in which case, the claim is that of the owners. But Don, can you provide some advice or expertise? Sorry to call you an expert again.
No, that's fine. You're spot on, Sully, on your explanation on it. There's a lot of this project that's covered by the Doyon for subsurface rights. And then the state retained subsurface rights in their areas. We are not buying the subsurface rights, so it would all stay with the state. And then with the mining claims that are out there, they've got claims to the subsurface rights too. That's all part of the negotiation process as we go through the claim areas. And the subsurface rights are retained by the state when we're crossing state lands.
Thanks for clarifying. I hadn't made the mention regarding native land, so thank you. I'm sure there's another question in this group. Mr. Cross questioned out. Any others? Any other? No? Okay. Well, Joy and Don, I think here at Fast Eddy, that wraps it up for the overall comments and feedback from the group. We've had a wonderful showing tonight. I cannot thank everybody enough on my end for being here. Joy, I know you have thank yous, but I mean, just from everyone at the Muckluck News, Beth, I mean, here at Fast Eddy's with Nick and Diane and Jackie, everyone's been so helpful. John with the chamber, letting me come by his home today. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of work to be done on this, of course, but it's been a pleasure personally just meeting with you all and being here tonight. So thank you so much for coming. But Joy, I want to hand it over to you. I just wanted to say that as folks are starting to wrap up here at Fast Eddy's, if there are any other questions and whatnot, then hand it over the baton to you for that.
Thank you so much, Sean, and definitely thanks everyone for joining us tonight. And Lindsay, thanks for your work in getting the slide presentation and just all the technical sides of this evening's meeting. And of course, Don and Mead for all of your expertise on this subject. And definitely please stay in touch. I think, as we mentioned earlier, this is a marathon and not a sprint, and the first of many conversations. So I'm actually going to, as soon as we wrap up the Zoom part of this, I'm going to run over and have some pizza and hopefully say hi to folks if they're still there. So look forward to seeing everyone next door. I chose to just stay on my computer just so that everyone that's online can hear me well and all of that good stuff. So wanted to just make it kind of the sound quality good for everybody. And yeah, Don, do you have anything that you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody. The questions you've asked are very good questions. They're very pertinent to your needs. And we need to address those as we move the project forward and work with you to be a successful project. So I thank you very much. I also look forward to now eating at Fast Eddy's because it's making me hungry. I look forward to meeting in person, hopefully in the not too distant future, because I think this face-to-face contact is important, and I welcome that opportunity as well. So thank you again. Good questions, well thought out process, and I appreciate the opportunity to work with you in the future as well.
Wonderful. Well, with that, I think we can go ahead and wrap up for the evening. We've had a few people actually from the Q&A box saying thank you. And I'll just read a few of these because it's so nice to have the positive feedback. You don't often have that, people taking the time to say thank you. And so I really appreciate that for folks that have done that. There's one here that says, thank you all for an excellent public comment discussion. And then thank you for this opportunity to hear about this project and to provide comments. And then one person said, thank you for making this available via Zoom. Very pleasant public meeting, best one yet, which made me smile. And then someone else said, great presentation. So for those of you that took the time to provide that feedback, thank you so much. And everyone that joined us, it was great to chat with you. And I really look forward to hopefully seeing you in person if you're next door. And for those virtually, hopefully we can see you in person someday too. And everyone take care and stay safe, and have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.